Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are in a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Grillin' JR with the voice of wrestling, Mr. Jim Ross. Jim, how are you, man?
I'm good, Conrad. I'm looking forward to the show today. It's about one of my favorite people that I've ever met, ever known, ever called matches for, Steve Dr. Death Williams, and should be a nice little journey looking back at the good doctor's career that I was there from. I mean, this is one of those literally, I was there before his career started. So it's going to be a fun trip down memory lane. Hope the fans will enjoy it as well. It certainly will give me pause to go back and try to catch some of Doc's matches on whether it be the WWE Network or YouTube or wherever you obtain your that type of material. So, but he was a really unique guy, especially in those UWF days when he was so young and just getting started wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, as they say. So it should be a fun show in that regard. Everything else in my life, Conrad, is good. I'm able to do what I'm doing and happy to get out of the house a little bit more, still being careful. And I need to get me one of those black masks, those coronavirus masks, the black one, maybe with a hat on it.
Oh, you know what? I think we could make that happen. We got to make that happen.
Well, we're going to be wearing these masks and doing these precautionary things, and the stock on Purell and all those hand sanitizers should be going up the roof because I don't think we'll ever get away from that now. The mask, maybe, but more than likely, the masks are still going to be prevalent. It's going to be kind of like going to Tokyo because, I used to wonder about that all the time when I go to Japan and see, a lot of people wearing masks. And I just don't think it's going to go away, quite frankly. This coronavirus has changed everyone's life in some degree, some more than others, but it's changed their lives forever. We're never going to go back to what we were because of preventive measures. So maybe a black mask would be a cool thing. Maybe match my hat. So anyway, it should be fun. It should be a fun. That'd be a fun little project, and we could sell those damn things, maybe.
Well, I know we're not going to have any trouble selling your book. The rave reviews continue to pour in. jrsbbq.com is where you can pick up yours. And as you pointed out last week, Jim, we're knee deep in grilling season now, man.
Be lying. Love it. For me, I'm a little, such exception to the rule. I got some crab cakes from Jimmy's in Baltimore the other day, and that's the first time I used my oven since I got it. I bought a new oven, stove, whatever you want to say. But I grill all the time. That's my escape. It's cathartic for me. You sit outside. I got a big TV out there in my outdoor kitchen. I can sit there and watch TV and not forget about what's grilling and get things burnt. So I'm a big grilling person, and we always had some great deals on sauces. The original barbecue sauce was my mother's recipe in basically. And then Jan did some things and added to it. And so that's our number one seller. And it's really, really good. But barbecue sauce is like women. The worst I ever had was pretty damn good.
Oh gosh.
Well, so I love it. When you and I are together, when we can eat barbecue, to me that's a good deal. It's like tasting someone's wine from a specific vineyard. It's just not very refined. I'm a barbecue guy, so I appreciate all sauces. So we use that, and then the hot barbecue sauce is good. Got a little spice to it, a little personality. Chipotle ketchup. I discovered this in my isolation here. If you take our Chipotle ketchup and you warm it in your microwave for like 15 seconds, this little ramekin or a little bowl or something, a small portion, it makes a phenomenal steak sauce. I mean, really, really badass. And that was just by accident. I just thought I'd try it and see what would happen, and it's wonderful. So if you don't want to put cold ketchup on your protein, warm it up. Warm it up. And then, of course, the number one, one of the top sellers we're having right now that's making a huge resurgence is the Main Event Mustard, which is JR's Main Event Mustard, is a jalapeno honey mustard. And it's got 1 gram of sugar. So for me, being diabetic too, that's an important condiment for me. And it's almost eliminated my, and I love mayo. I do. And I know the difference between mayonnaise and Miracle Whip. I get that too. I've got both. But I just don't use them much anymore. I became that mustard guy, and it just makes everything better. I cooked the other day. I grilled some salmon, and at the end of the process, about a minute or two before I took the salmon off the grill, I did a drizzle of the mustard. Amazing. It's a nice dressing, so to speak, that doesn't kill you on calories, fat, all those things. So it's good. And all my products are gluten free. So not a bad thing. JRSBBQ.com, and we're selling about 25 or 30 books a day. It's amazing. So I didn't know how long this offer is going to last, but hell, there's no reason to take it off. Just if people are still buying it and they're enjoying it, I'm going to keep it up there. We're going to continue to sell books so we can personalize the autograph and pay for the shipping in the lower 48 states and get all the whole package. So it's pretty good. Life is pretty good, Conrad. And I know your business. Every time I see an ad on the TV about people refinancing a loan, I think of your company because I know you're doing a tremendous amount of that right now. And it's something that people should think about. If this will give you if refinance, it gives you some relief and returns some money to you. Hell, it's a no-brainer, right?
It is. And I'm glad you mentioned that. We've been helping a lot of our mutual friends out lately, and we'd be glad to help you as well. SaveWithConrad.com. Go ahead and take a little spring break from house payments, get a better interest rate, pay your house off faster, consolidate some debt, whatever you're looking for. SaveWithConrad.com is where you need to be. But really, we're glad you're with us right now because we're celebrating a pretty special occasion today. I had this date circled way back when we first started recording the podcast. Today would have been Dr. Death's 60th birthday. Born May 14th, 1960, Steve Williams, right there in Lakewood, Colorado. He attended Lakewood High School in Colorado, graduated in 78. He's the youngest of 4 children. He was on the track and field team. He played football, of course. He wrestled all 4 years. And then eventually he would go on to graduate from the University of Oklahoma in 81 after a football career where, of course, he was named an All-American. He also competed as an amateur wrestler. He's a 4-time All-American there, finishing 6th as a freshman, 5th as a sophomore, 3rd as a junior, and 2nd as a senior. His older brother, Jeff, was a starting tight end and convinced Williams coming out of high school that, maybe he should come to Oklahoma. He's the most heavily recruited offensive lineman in the country. So why not? He starts every game in 1982 for the Sooners at right guard. He's named to the All-8 first team, played in the 83 Fiesta Bowl. He's also a member of the Sooners 1980 Orange Bowl and 81 Sun Bowl squads. He played both guard positions while at OU, a starting offensive guard on the football team, and a lead blocker for Heisman Trophy candidates Billy Sims and Marcus Dupree. And ESPN even did a 30 for 30 on Marcus Dupree a few years ago, and they brought him back into the national conversation. But either way, we could go on and on. This guy is one of the most decorated amateur athletes, and he's right in your backyard of Oklahoma. So it makes sense that y'all eventually become fast friends.
Yeah, I grew up as a major, just like you did with Alabama. A lot of folks can identify, whether it be their European soccer team, football teams, I should say, mates, or your favorite college team, pro team. we all got these allegiances, which is one of the things we miss about sports. I don't think people fully realize. We've got separation anxiety. We love it. Right now is the time to be talking about spring. Get out. The spring football should just have been ending. The spring games should have been played. The anticipation builds, but we got nothing. We don't even know if we're going to have a season this year. And certainly, it stands to reason, if you're not going to have students in the classroom because of the virus and the restrictions that it brings with it, then if no students, no football. So hopefully these vaccines and these things that they're talking about developing will be developed sooner than later, if we can have some football. Dr. Death, Steve Williams, was the number one recruited, number one rated offensive lineman in the United States his senior year in high school. And his brother Jeff was a little bit older than him, and that was a package deal. I've talked to Coach Switzer about this a few times. Coach Barry Switzer was his head coach. And Doc was the target. They wanted Doc very badly. And, of course, they had Stan Abel, the wrestling coach, very charismatic. And he wanted Doc to wrestle. Pardon me. So Doc was just a natural brute. The thing about Doc was he got that nickname, by the way, in high school. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, he got a broken nose or a cheekbone or something, but something broke in his face in competition. And so he wore like a hockey goalie's mask type apparatus to protect his injury. And some local reporter said he looked like Dr. Death because he had the mask on. He's scary looking, and Steve was a big guy, so all that stuff. So he was a highly recruited football player. And then, lo and behold, he's 19 years old, becoming an All-American in wrestling, and playing on the football team. I think Doc actually played in 4 bowl games, so he had a good run there at OU, and was a hell of a great starter on some really good teams. So that's how that went. And Stan Abel, the wrestling coach, who went to high school with Cowboy Bill Watts, and wrestled at OU with Watts. Way back in the day, he was the catalyst of getting Cowboy to, hey, you got to meet this kid. This big, our big heavyweight could be something in your business, et cetera, et cetera. So we met Doc, I believe, at the beginning of his junior year in college, Cowboy and I, and I was just tagging along, still sitting under the learning tree. But boy, I became fast friends with Steve. His age difference was with Cowboy was a little bit more significant, but mine was we weren't. I was 8 years older than him, so we're kind of the same generation in that respect. So he was always on the radar since his junior year in college, and then after his junior year in college is when Cowboy signed him to a contract to come to work for Mid-South Wrestling. And I remember the coaches saying, don't let him eat too much because we don't want him to be 330, low threes. Okay. So I remember that very vividly, and he was just a natural, Conrad. And that's the thing about recruiting athletes or recruiting guys in team sports. The reason I always did that, I think people just thought I was, crazy for football, which I am kind of crazy for football. But bottom line is you get a guy that's been in a team environment. They've been in locker rooms. They've coexisted with their peers and their teammates. And they understand about setting goals, and they know how to push themselves. Can you imagine going from a bowl game and all the glitz and glamour of a bowl game to going back into the isolation of a wrestling room?
No.
And he did it. Pardon me. He did it every year as in college. He did he'd go from football immediately right into wrestling. So sometimes in the early part of the season, he wasn't as good as he was at the end of the season when he got back in wrestling shape. There's 2 different conditions there. So he had everything you wanted. He's just imposing. And the thing that Doc always impressed me about Doc, one of the things, his amazing flexibility. He could do splits and he could do things at 300 pounds that the guys aren't supposed to be able to do. He just was very, very gifted athletically. And so it's no wonder that he had such an outstanding career that should have been better without a few shots to the feet and some bad decisions. It could have been better. All of us could be better. But he had a very impressive career that we're going to discuss. So that's how it started for us. And then So Dr. Death's been in my life in my life as consciously since about 1982 or three. So I got a lot of stories about him. So let's tell some of them.
Let's run down some more accolades first. He's a 4-time All-American heavyweight wrestler, 3-time Big 8 champion. His senior year, he would lose in the finals of the NCAA tournament to future Olympic medalist Bruce Baumgartner. We should also mention that he picked up some notable wins while he's wrestling in college, including a win over UFC Hall of Famer Dan Severn and future gold medalist Lou Bannock. But one of the things that jumped out to me was, and this is directly from my notes here, TJ Kerr, one of the winningest coaches in college wrestling history, has said that when the coaches were wanting to impose a weight limit on the heavyweight division, because the feeling was the 400 pounders who couldn't really move, also couldn't be moved easily, which led to dull matches and made the heavyweight division not appear to be nearly as athletic. So they decided to come up with an upper weight limit, and it's Steve Williams, who was the 285 pound weight limit in the heavyweight division, which still exists to this day, where it all sort of came from. Do you think that Dr. Death really was the inspiration for the cutoff for the heavyweight division?
I think he was certainly one of them. I think maybe the biggest culprit, no pun intended, was Chris Taylor. Chris Taylor, you remember the big heavyweight that the great picture of him being suplexed, I think in the Olympic Games or the World Games or something. He was, I think, at Iowa State. He went to AWA and was trained by Vern Gagne's group. So Chris Taylor might have been the forerunner of that, Conrad, because Chris was well over 400. Doc was, like I said, in the mid to low threes. He was 310, 320, 330. And so that had an influence. So he had to pull some weight. And that was hard to do when you come out of football to make weight. That was another challenge for him that he always had to deal with. You leave the football team, usually a bowl game, much like Alabama. We almost take these bowl games for granted because we go all the time. And so he'd get out of football and go right into the wrestling training camp because he'd been practicing for football until then. So he had to work on his weight as that hulking offensive lineman that was a road grader. He had to drop some lbs, and he did, and it certainly wasn't easy. I remember his favorite thing to do, as far as having to lose weight, he would eat copious amounts of tuna, like canned tuna.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's almost like if you ate a can of tuna and you thought, let's say he threw the can in the back seat, eventually that back seat's going to be dotted with tuna because he ate tuna all day, every day. I'm not saying that's healthy, but he ate a ton of protein. But tuna was his go-to in that regard. And I remember him telling me one time, said, if I never see another can of tuna, I'll be the happiest guy in the world, kid. Happiest guy in the world. Jimbo. I was always Jimbo to him. I wasn't JR, never was JR. I was always Jimbo. So he's a very interesting cat, very, very interesting, complex, and unique, to say the very least. So he was a freak of nature as far as athletics were concerned. So I always think about him. I think about him all the time. I'm glad we're doing this on his birthday because I can promise you, if he was still alive, he and I would have already had a call, and talked. But I did the eulogy at his funeral, one of them, Stan Hansen the other, and I didn't even recognize Doc. Cancer just killed him. It killed him literally, but you couldn't even determine that was him. It was so sad. That's such a sad thing. And that was that. I flew out there on a private plane with Coach Switzer and a couple other guys from OU, dignitaries, and Coach said a few words too. But it was hard. That was a hard deal. And but thank God he's no more pain. That's what Stan Hansen he started his eulogy. No more pain. He's in no more pain, and that's a good statement because he was suffering. But he toughed it out. I never heard him complain. Never heard him complain about it. He just, he couldn't talk. Cancer of the throat, and he didn't even smoke. He might smoke a little weed every now and then, but hell, everybody did back then. But he didn't smoke cigarettes, but he did dip, and the dipping, I think, was his enemy.
Well, his enemy for a couple of bowl games, the Orange Bowls, are Ron Simmons. I can't believe it, but they actually played against each other in those games. Talk about a small world.
Mm-hmm.
Let's fast forward though. After college, he gets selected by the New Jersey Generals in the USFL territorial draft, and he winds up signing on there. He's a teammate with Herschel Walker. They convert him to a defensive tackle, and he actually gets a little playing time. That's also shown on like ESPN and whatnot. Did he have aspirations of playing in the NFL?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. The Generals were Donald Trump's team.
Right.
He owned that team, and it's spent a lot of money getting Herschel and other significant players. The problem Doc had there was that he had been an offensive lineman his entire career in college, playing guard. And for those that aren't football savvy, the guard is right next to the center guard tackle. And he was moved to defensive line. He was moved to nose tackle, and he didn't have the technique or the background or the fundamental skill set of being a defensive lineman. And so he didn't get as much playing time as I'm sure he wanted, but it's always to me a head scratcher as to why they moved him from the offensive side of the ball to the defensive side of the ball. You ran the ball a lot back in those days, so maybe the consensus was he might have issues pass blocking. That could have been an excuse, but he didn't play as much as he wanted. I know he was a little frustrated with that, and that soon led to his leaving the USFL because it just wasn't working out the way that he wanted. But I think that the one thing that hurt OU's offensive linemen then that does it now is the fact that they were a wishbone, a running team. And so, pass blocking was something kind of foreign to the OU offensive lineman. And to go to the next level, it's not an option. You've got to be able to pass block as an offensive lineman. So too much money invested in the quarterbacks to have them on their ass. So I think that was part of the issues there. But he's like any kid that grew up as a football player. He wanted to be in the NFL. It just didn't work out that way for him. And I think part of that was because of the offensive system that he came from at that time and the fact that pass blocking was not a commodity.
According to the legend, Stanley Abel, the wrestling coach at Oklahoma, is who originally reaches out to Bill Watts. You confirm that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that happens in 79 when Williams is a freshman. And I guess Stanley's thinking the intensity that he has as an amateur and his sort of name recognition from football, maybe he'd be a natural for Bill Watts. Talk to me in more detail about how his training in wrestling came to be, and just talk to us about Cowboy and Dr. Death's relationship.
They had a lot in common, and they bonded. And I think that Cowboy Bill Watts saw a lot of himself in the young Steve Williams. Big, imposing Watts. Watts had to pull weight, ironically, for football for Bud Wilkinson, the famous coach at OU at the time. Wilkinson didn't want any offensive lineman over 225 pounds. And hell, Watts was 225 in the ninth grade. So he had issues with his weight. He was a little bit of a nonconformist, believe that or not. Could be argumentative, very high IQ. He played football and wrestled. The irony of that is the 225 was an issue for Cowboy. And the fact there was a guy named Dale Lewis. Dale Lewis is a longtime pro wrestler that was the heavyweight. So when they'd have ranking matches, see who was going to start, who was going to actually be on the mat during a duel, for example. Watts would lose to Dale Lewis 1-0, 2-1, 3-2, because Dale was a very defensive-minded, slow-paced, and it wrestled near the edge, so he could go out of bounds, and the referee had to restart. So Watts and Doc had a lot in common in that respect, and they got along great. Like you said, Stan Abel was a big party guy, and he was a charismatic son of a gun. He coached a lot of All-Americans, a lot of Olympic gold medalists, national champions, just a really great wrestling coach. And he just knew, I think he thought, Doc's going to have a hard time making it in the NFL because he's not a pass blocker.
Right.
But in your world, Bill, talking to Cowboy, he might be perfect. So physically, you kind of dig what you're getting there. He was again athletic as hell, strong, ox strong. I mean, crazy strong. So, but Bill took to him very like a nephew or a son even, and so it worked out beautifully for us for a good while. And he was a UWF champion, all those good things we'll talk about. But Watts and Doc had so much in common, and they also battled at times. Doc would discipline him, or Bill would discipline Doc, but it's like a kid. You know, he was like his son in a large sense, and how he led him, he mentored him, and so to me, it was a marriage made in heaven, football heaven, wrestling heaven for those two guys.
Talk to me a little bit about his training. You know, I mean, obviously we know what training looks like these days. A lot of our listeners are familiar with the Performance Center. That didn't exist back here. Obviously the business has changed quite a bit too, but do you remember anything about his training you could tell us about? Something he took too quickly, something he struggled with? Was he a natural? Did he quote unquote attack the mat like we've heard Kurt Angle did when he was starting? What can you tell us about how quickly he picked up the wrestling game?
It was natural. It really was natural for him. The physical stuff was just taken for granted because he was, again, so flexible, so big, so strong, so quick, great feet. That's one thing about being an offensive lineman when you're with a primary running team, is that you do a lot of footwork. And he had great feet. He wasn't a Clydesdale. He was a thoroughbred. He moved around very well for a guy his size. But a lot of the guys, you know, when Cowboy asked some of the talent, say, I'm going to bring this kid to TV or whatever, I'm going to bring him to this house show, live event, and I want you to come early because I want you to roll around with him. A lot of the guys did that. So I don't remember who all was in the roster. I think Ted DiBiase was, and I think Teddy was one of the guys that had some hand in mentoring or coaching up Doc. But a lot of it was under Cowboy. All of it was really under Cowboy supervision. He was like the head coach, and you know the pictures of Bear Bryant in his tower, you know, on the big on the practice field at Alabama, where he those iconic pictures. Mm-hmm. That's kind of how Cowboy was, except he was just standing at ringside, coaching every move, spread your feet, get better balance, you know. And the thing about Doc was, he was so damn strong that he didn't really know how strong he was. So him being able to protect whomever he was working with was a big learning curve, because he didn't have that professional wrestling gene automatically where he would not kill you. You know, when he locked up, he could lock. You know, I remember guys saying, you know, if I can just get him past the goddamn lockup without hurting me, mm-hmm. It's a win. So he's just that strong, and his adrenaline would get pumping, and he'd forget it was work, and he'd become very aggressive. So, but a lot of the talents, when the Cowboy asked you to work out with somebody, you didn't want to disappoint him, whether you wanted to be a mentor or not. You did it, and most of the guys were very willing to help Doc because he was a very endearing personality. You know, he wanted to learn. He listened. Again, while you recruit athletes, he could take coaching. He'd been taking coaching his entire life, wrestling in junior high, high school, football, all that stuff. Track and field, as you mentioned. If there was a sport playing in season, Doc was on the team. So he's used to being coached up. And I like that aspect of it for the fact that some guys who are more of the entertainer situation sometimes take exception to being corrected. And he never had that issue. He was a product of his environment. And that environment led to becoming a good student of the game of pro wrestling.
His first match happens May 26, 1982 in Shreveport, Louisiana. He gets a win over Billy Starr. He actually has his second match the very same night, defeating the Turk. Fast forward, and he gets a title shot very quickly in the Mid-South Louisiana title tournament. It's the July 6, 1982 showing. Ultimately, he'd lose to the one-man gang in the first round. Fast forward into 83, and in January, he has a couple of matches against a young guy named Marty Lundy. How about
mm-hmm.
that?
Yep.
Arn Anderson before he was Arn Anderson. It's just fun to sort of trace back the beginnings of all of this. Jim Cornette has gone on record to tell a story during this time where Steve is teaming with Hercules Hernandez against the Rock and Roll Express. And after a match, Steve and Herc are trying to leave the ring, and Jim said Hercules is throwing people over his head to get him out of the way, and Steve is just dropping people, and Jim has Steve's football helmet because Steve wore it to the ring. So Jim is hitting people with that.
God damn it. I never wore a helmet in my life. I'll kill you, son of a bitch. Don't touch my shit. Or me.
Jim says another night he's in a bar and referee Pee Wee Anderson rips his shirt off and gets on the bar and doing all these Hulk Hogan poses. And that leads to a bit of a little fracas, and Steve and Hercules beat up about a dozen guys. And he says they did get in trouble for that, but they didn't get fired because they won the fight.
Yep.
And we've heard about this rule. Tell us about this rule.
Well, the Cowboy had a rule, and people think, oh, come on. That's in today's world of HR and all that stuff, it wouldn't fly. But Cowboy had a rule that if you get into a fight with a quote unquote civilian, i.e. a fan, or maybe it's a person not a fan, maybe they're anti-fan, but nonetheless, if you got in a fight with a civilian and you got your ass whipped, you're out. You got your notice. You're done immediately. No note. You're done. And so that's why when guys like alpha males like Doc and Hercules Hernandez will go into a bar and they're having a social little cocktail, and but the ladies there, were kind of diverting their attention from the guy they came with to these big muscle guys, these big, brutes in great shape and looking good and all that good stuff. So it always created some animosity. And Doc and Hercules especially, they weren't the only ones. We had some tough guys in that territory. Rick Steiner was there. He didn't lose any street fights. A lot of guys are just tougher than shit. Jim Duggan didn't lose any street fights. So Cowboy loved those guys because of their tenacity, and they protected the business. It's like that little bit of the same personality that we saw a few weeks ago on the Dark Side of the Ring with Dr. D. David Schultz.
Yeah.
He protected the business, maybe with not the best logic, but the theory of protecting the business and why you're protecting the business in that era was very, very important. And a lot of guys were just raised with that deal, like we saw on the Dark Side thing that, Schultz was in training for weeks before he got smartened up that the business was showbiz.
Right.
So all they were doing there, the same thing everybody did teaching. If they can beat you up and hurt you and you quit, then you're not made for the business. So you don't tell them anything about the inner workings of the wrestling business until you see that they're going to be somebody that will commit themselves mentally and physically to the process. So that's kind of the deal with Doc. The rule was the rule. You lose a fight, and then Cowboy, of course, when he got details of a fight, he wanted all the details because he was living vicariously through these cats. If Bill was young and in the wrestling business, he'd been the same way. He'd go to bars, try to steal your girlfriend. He might even steal your drink, intimidate you, and then the fight would ensue. Then he would knock somebody out in a couple of punches. And Doc and Hercules are a lot like that too. They're just so big, so strong, and quickness. It was they were a hard pair to beat in a street fight. So beating up 10 guys was not that unique. It happened before, and then finally when they go back to the bar the second time, ironically and amazingly, nobody gave them any shit.
Let's talk about another fight that's sort of become legendary, or I guess an almost fight. Cornette said once upon a time, Doc and Hawk had a confrontation, maybe in a locker room in Chicago, but they're cussing mad at each other, nose to nose. And Jim said he's trying to crawl in a locker and just get out of the way, but eventually cooler heads prevail. They don't come to blows, but Jim says he loved Hawk, but his money would have been on Doc. Do you remember hearing about this story that maybe there was a confrontation in the back between the two?
Yeah, of course. Two high-strung guys.
Right.
Two alpha males that didn't want to compromise. I was actually involved in a situation with those two guys in Florida at a TV. And I remember watching the ongoings with Nate, because Nate, of course, being a Minnesota guy, and Hawk being a Minnesotan, he said, "Oh man, your boy's going to get it tonight, JR." All right, okay, Nate. So the issue was that I got in between the guys and started, scolding them. I knew they weren't going to beat me up because that would not have been a big win on your one-loss record. So the cooler heads prevailed. I said, "You guys are going to hurt each other. Then you're going to be off work, and then when you're off work, you're not going to make a goddamn dime. Is that what you want? Is that? Are you neither one? Are you both that stupid?" So I said, "Come on, get your shit together and move on. Let's just move on here." And that's kind of what we did on that deal. They didn't fight, but they sure as hell wanted to. And I'm not Cornette in that respect. My money would have been on Doc. And they said, well, why would you say that? Because Hawk was a great street fighter. He had a hell of a punch. Those punches are rendered ineffective when the puncher is on his ass. He's on his back.
Right.
And that's what amateur wrestlers do. Doc would have broken him down, taken him off his feet, which would have negated the power of the punching power to a large degree. And that's how that fight would have ended. Then he would have mounted him, and then he would have beat the shit out of Hawk. That's what would have happened. And so he could have broken his hand. He could have broken orbital bones, noses, chipped teeth, all that stuff. So that nobody needed that, and they didn't need it. So cooler heads, as I said, prevailed, and they didn't come to blows. But I admire Hawk for Doc was a younger guy, and he, we didn't know what they didn't. A lot of those guys didn't know about the background as well as they should have, because he was a machine, and that's right down his alley. Doc's alley was, you want to get physical. I like that. So, but not too many guys tried him, quite frankly.
Let's keep it moving. Let's talk about some in-ring stuff. May 3rd, 1985, Steve is teaming with Ted DiBiase, and they beat the Rock and Roll Express to win the Mid-South Tag Team titles. I feel like a lot lately, especially this year, I've been covering topics on the podcast where more and more people credit Ted DiBiase as being a huge part of their development as a professional wrestler. Is that the case for Dr. Death as well?
Yeah, Teddy was, the second generation. His mom and dad both were pro wrestlers. Teddy's mom and dad, and so Teddy had the gene. He had the wrestling in his blood. And the other thing about Ted was always willing, much like he is today in his ministry. He was always willing to help people, and he also saw that Doc could help us all make more money, because then there was no merchandise, royalty checks. The wrestling conventions had not started. There weren't too many non-wrestling paid gigs. So, we didn't have pay-per-view. So the way you made money was to sell tickets to the live events. That was it. And so if a talent saw another younger talent that might be able to help us achieve that goal, because that money all trickles down. If the pie is bigger, your slice will be bigger. And that's kind of, I think, how Teddy had looked at Doc. And of course they had good chemistry. They liked each other. They had similar backgrounds as far as playing a little college football, and all that stuff. So, but Ted was a great teacher and a great motivator in that regard. So Teddy was a big part of Doc's early career without question.
They eventually dropped these tag titles, but win them back and then drop them and then win them back, and the typical fare. But one of the tag teams they encounter, besides other greats like Eddie Gilbert and Dick Murdoch and guys like that, the Sheepherders, who we know are going to become the Bushwhackers in the WWF. But the Mid-South presentation of the Sheepherders is a little different than the Bushwhackers.
Yeah, they were blood and guts, very aggressive. They were not a comedy act. They were stone cold heels. They played their role immensely well. They knew how to be heels. And one of the great things about being a heel in that era, especially in the Mid-South, was that Cowboy loved the heat. He loved to lead the crowd. His philosophy was, because we're going to be back here next week, same time, same place, different night, it wasn't always the happy ending at the, Conrad. It was just he liked the people to leave talking and buzzing and angry and looking for more. And so that was kind of the formula there with that deal. And the Sheepherders fit right in, because the key ingredient to being a heel in that era was you can't be afraid of the audience. You got to respect them, and certainly got to appreciate their fact they're buying a ticket, but you can't let the audience see you have fear, or you're intimidated by the audience's presence. And the Sheepherders fit that bill very, very well. Most of their matches had blood. I'm not saying that's the right way to go or the wrong way to go, but it's what it was. The theory was that if somebody's beating you in the face and they don't leave any DNA, and I said this before on this show, the guy getting the ropes, Irish whip, boom. You follow the guy in, you jump on the second rope, you start punching his face 10 times. It's got to be 10, because the audience is going to count with you. And then when you're done, there's no visible evidence you were even there. There's no DNA. And so it's an expose in a large degree that your punches, you hit a guy 10 times in the face, no swelling, no redness, no bruising, no blood, no emotion. And so the sheep herders they were a unique team. And by the time we got them, they'd been in the business a long time. They'd been in a lot of territories as the top heel team. And so they had their act down, man. They were very, very good. So working with guys like that, I've said this before many times, you can't get better unless you're working. You have to have two things in place. One, a live paying audience, certainly. You have to have that. And the other thing is you got to work with people that's better than you.
Right.
We talked just a second ago about Doc's first matches. Turk was an old veteran, been around forever. Billy Starr, veteran. Their skill set was better than Dr. Death's at that time. And that's why they were working with Doc. And those were TV matches, so they were short basically anyway. But they were better than Doc. And working with guys like that, even though they weren't household names, their skill set was more advanced. So if you have a paying audience that you can hear react to your stuff, and then you have this other element in place where your opponent's better than you, so you got to work up to their level. They don't have to work down to yours. It's a pretty winning formula. So I think in the early days, Cowboy was very protective of Doc because he saw that potentially Steve Dr. Death Williams could be the number one guy in the territory and be the guy we built around. And to a large degree, that happened in his early career.
Well, not too terribly long after he gets up and going here in his run with the tag titles, eventually the company sort of switches gears on him. It's no longer Mid-South. Now it's the Universal Wrestling Federation. This is Bill Watts' attempt to sort of go national. What do you think of the name change from Mid-South to UWF?
I was involved in a lot of conversations about that. And, you know, the key word was universal, because there was the World Wrestling Federation. There was World Championship Wrestling, the show that Watts used to book in Atlanta when he was wrestling there. So the key words, what do we use that separates us from the word world? And we came up with universe. And I'm not positive, but I think Bill's wife at that time, Enna, I think she had something to say about, not something to say, but to contribute to that deal. So universal became our buzzword. And then the rest of it was just easy. Universal Wrestling Federation, the UWF, it kind of had a little ring to it. But, we had to do something to get away. We wanted to attract national sponsors. Our syndicated television ratings were off the board. We were the number one syndicated television show in the United States for a long time. And that includes Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune, which was on the air at that time, if I'm not mistaken. So number one, and syndication was great. We were on all network affiliates to that whole region of the country, or major independent stations like WGNO in New Orleans at that time, Indy. So anyway, it was interesting development there to try to compete, and we thought our brand was pretty damn good. We'd gone on TBS before that as Mid-South Wrestling, playing a week-old syndicated show that had only been aired in our area, our geographical area. So for the vast majority of the audience, these shows, even though they had already aired in a territory a week earlier, was new material. And as you and I both know, based on the TV ratings, it was amazingly popular. I think it averaged a 5 rating or something like that, which was very, very good. And Ted Turner liked working with Cowboy. They'd been buddies for a long time, Hellraisers and all that good stuff. So, but then Ted broke his word, and through the McMahon deal, and we were off. But it showed us that there was an appeal for our product nationally, and that was one of the reasons that we wanted to get out of, wanted to expand, because it's like having a diversified portfolio. If you got all your eggs in one basket, sometimes it's not a productive scenario. And so by having a national brand and getting our TV shows in a lot of different markets, we believe that we could come in there in time and compete, because the Mid-South area, because of the economy and the oil and the natural gas going to hell, people did not have a lot of money, just disposable income to buy tickets. Ironically, at the same time, our TV ratings had never been better. And so that would be a concern. People couldn't afford to go to live events, but they sure as hell still watch the television, which is amazing to me that some wrestling shows are on the downtrend in a time where there's more people watching television. It's it's ironic. It's a cruel irony. But the UWF was an interesting idea. It expanded our syndication to 120 something stations nationally, and it also gave us a property that we didn't discuss a lot or at all. It gave us a property that we could sell if necessary, and that's what we ended up doing. Obviously, as we'll talk about. But UWF was a decent idea. The universal was the key term on the brainstorming sessions. How do we differentiate for using the word world? And we found it through the universe, so to speak.
In April of '86, he's going to team up with Terry Taylor to compete in the first Jim Crockett Sr. Memorial Cup. The Crockett Cup has become almost a legendary tag team tournament. Ultimately, in the quarterfinals, they go to a time limit draw with Ivan and Nikita Koloff, thus eliminating both teams. What are your memories of the first Crockett Cup?
I loved it. I remember a couple of interesting stories. I went down there and did a big media blitz with Dusty and Baby Doll. And with all of our media contacts in New Orleans, we got Dusty. Not that it was a hard chore, but we got him all over town. We got him in TV, radio, newspaper, the whole 9 yards. So I remember that. Been a great media tour, and Dusty was very impressed. I think that helped solidify our relationship because I had it highly organized. I mean, literally down to the half hour, maybe even more extreme than that. The second thing I remember is in a production meeting that the position of ring announcer came up. And I'll always appreciate Jimmy Crockett for this. And Cowboy said, well, why don't we just have your guy and Jim do the ring announcing? And Jimmy Crockett says, which I appreciated. He said, my announcer doesn't do, my play-by-play announcer does not do ring announcing. It's not good for his image. It's not good for the position. Not going to happen. So then Bill, of course, being somewhat defiant and understanding Jimmy's logic, well, then my guy won't do it either. So I was tickled shitless. I didn't want to be the ring announcer for that show. It's going to, 3 or 4 hour show at least. And, brother's got to pee.
Right.
So that was one conversation. And I always found it amazing on how the show was booked. When you book a tournament, any tournament in pro wrestling, you start with the winner and work backwards to the first round. And you stair step them back. Then of course, it works going forward. You know who's going to win. You know what you want to do. Who you want to push. The push is important, Conrad. I'm telling you, the push, baby. So that was an interesting process. Listen to the finishes, and of course, a great example of that was the time limit draw. Funny how I was so adamant about having time limits in AEW, and kind of where my origins come from. It gives you another finish,
right?
And it doesn't destroy talents. Not that losing does, but losing the wrong ways doesn't do you any favors, and losing too much doesn't do you any favors. But going a time limit draw, that's kind of what raised the eyebrows on Darby Allin, because he won a 20-minute time limit draw with Cody months ago in their first outing. So that was interesting to see the creative and how that was done, and the time limit draw was utilized because that protected Crockett's team of Nikolai and Ivan. That's what we said, right? To Nikolai and Ivan, and it protected the UWF team as well. So they were eliminated. So now they're taken care of. They're addressed, and it's an interesting little wrinkle for the tournament. So I enjoyed that. I stayed at the Hyatt Regency across the way from the Superdome, and for many nights. Same place I stayed with Muhammad Ali when we did the Superdome show. So I was kind of familiar with that area. And I was in New Orleans every week pretty much. So it became a second home in that regard. But it was an interesting experience. It was interesting to see how all the talent was wrangled and managed and placated and babysat and all those things, because everybody's only concerned about the finish. I've always been more concerned about the performance overall than just the last 3 seconds. But the talent see it a whole different way. And so, but it was an interesting experience. I thought there was no way in hell that Cowboy, who was known to not play well with others at times, how this was going to work out, him being cooperative with Jimmy Crockett and Dusty. But Dusty and Cowboy got along so well. It was Bill that made Dusty a babyface in Florida, and the rest is history. So it was interesting, Conrad. I look back on those days very fondly. I met a lot of talents that I heretofore had either just met in passing or hadn't met at all. That was kind of cool. So it was a fun experience. And anytime you can spend multiple days in New Orleans, ain't a bad thing, except when it's raining. Not a good deal.
Let's keep it going here. I guess we should mention there's a pretty legendary story that while he's working with the UWF, Brad Armstrong is his opponent. He goes in for an elbow. Steve's going to duck it, but somehow Brad's elbow connects and busts him open bad. Steve has to get 108 stitches around his orbital socket, and he still wrestles the next night. And I think Brad was pretty nervous that Doc was going to kill him, but I guess eventually when they get together, he says, "Fuck it. It ain't ballet, brother." What do you remember about this horrific incident where we need 100+ stitches?
I was there, man. I was there, working behind a hot microphone, Conrad. Well, the spot wasn't Brad Armstrong's fault. Doc was supposed to duck.
Right.
And he wasn't a good ducker. he kept churning along like a train, but he didn't duck low enough, and it caught to the elbow like a forearm shiver. Caught Doc, the point of the elbow caught him right there in the eye. And man, it was gruesome. I mean, it was absolutely gruesome. You can imagine a wound requiring 100. This is no exaggeration, folks. It's not one of those wrestling deals where, well, it started out he had 10 stitches and it went to 30. Then, he had 108 stitches. We took him to the hospital, I think Grizzly Smith may have taken him to the hospital, the lead agent. And they had to get an ophthalmologist, I think it was an ophthalmologist, to do the stitching because it was so tender and so sensitive around that eye. They wanted to protect his eye, his vision. But they get 108 stitches. So he comes back, Doc comes back from the hospital. The eyes really eyes already swell shut. It's ugly as hell. But he'd been cleaned up from the blood, obviously, stitched up. And then he comes back, and me and Cowboy were talking about something after the taping. Here comes the Doc. And so Doc gives us the lowdown of what he just experienced at the hospital. And he said to Cowboy, I remember this like it was yesterday. He said, well, Bill, what do you want me to do? Of course, Cowboy says, what the fuck you mean, what I want you to do? I mean, about my bookings. I want you to make your goddamn booking, Steve. You're booked in Biloxi tomorrow night. And that's where you'll be, and that's where you're going to wrestle with 108 stitches. So in today's world, that would have been an issue.
Yeah.
To Doc, he just wanted to hear it from the boss that I'm going to Biloxi tomorrow. Because Doc also realized he might not have been a Mensa member or a CPA candidate, but he knew that if he didn't work, he didn't get paid. So the incentive to go to work, injured or not, was there, rightfully or wrongfully. And but he was really, I couldn't believe it. So I talked to Bill. I said, are you sure you want him to work? And then, the mat's dirty and you could get infected. And he said, well, we're going to have him bandaged up. We'll take care of him. But goddamn, the Cowboy saying no deal. Kid, this ain't ballet. And I use that myself more often than not, because that's what I learned. There's going to be injuries, even in a show business presentation, because these athletes are going hard. They're big and they're strong, and they don't have any stuntmen. So it's bound to be an issue, an injury here, there, and yon. And so, that was Cowboy's deal. He's got to learn to be tough. He's got to learn to listen. He's got to learn to fucking duck.
Right.
So that was kind of how Cowboy, he had concerns, but not enough to take Doc sitting down and pay him while he was off. You're going to want money. You got to go earn it. And sometimes we pay for our mistakes. And that's what you're going to be doing until this eye heals up. And that's where it was left. He never missed a booking with 108 stitches in his eye. Never missed one goddamn booking. None, which is astonishing. Nowadays, you call your agent, your manager, you have your wife call, your mom call, whatever. Somebody would say something. But Doc was a cowboy, was a different breed of cat, but so was Dr. Destiny Williams, a much different breed of cat.
On May 30th, 1986 in Houston, Texas, Steve is involved in a tournament to crown the first ever UWF world champion. In round 1, he beats Rick Steiner. In the semis, though, he's defeated by Terry Gordie. He'd go on to win the thing and become the first UWF world champ. What'd you think in hindsight? Should it have been Dr. Death, or were you tickled with Terry Gordie? It seems like everybody sort of praises both of these guys universally.
Gordie was more ready from a skill set and experience perspective than Doc. Doc was getting there. He was evolving. He was developing. But Gordie was a great first UWF champion. Terry's work was sublime. As I mentioned on the show, I've had a lot of guys that said, when they saw Terry Gordie in Mississippi working for George Culkin, that he was the best teenage wrestler that they ever saw. And that was coming from some guys that were big time stars. And they weren't necessarily president of Terry's fan club. It's just a matter of fact. So I thought it was a good call. And then, and again, how it was booked. Look at how it was booked. Dr. Death had an out. He lost to the guy that became the champion. But during their match together, there were many opportunities for Doc to win the match via false finishes, et cetera, but he just came up a little bit short through hook or crook. So I had no issues with it. It was and man, it drew money too. I mean, both those guys are big time over. Just look at that visual. You got two guys that are probably, within a barbecue rib or two at 300 pounds. Both are very athletic, and working with Terry Gordie made Doc better because Terry Gordie had a higher skill set at that point in time than Steve. So all that formula that Cowboy always preached to me about you got to work with somebody better to get better, all those things. You got to work for a live audience to get better. It was all in place. The same philosophy of blocking and tackling that you teach to a football player. Solid fundamentals. But I liked the choice of it. And Terry had, and to be honest with you, Terry Gordie had a lot more personality. Doc was not blessed with great outgoing personality. He was he was just a good old boy. And Gordie had been in the business long enough, starting as a teen, as we mentioned, to understand that the sizzle part of the formula was very, very important. Now, over time, Doc started developing sizzle and became more free with his emotions and his actions. But Terry Gordie was the right choice at that time to be the first UWF champion.
Let's keep it moving and talk about July. He makes his first tour of Japan, this time for New Japan. On August 5th, he has a pretty important match. He faces Antonio Inoki. Of course, Inoki wins the match, but relatively early on in a guy's career working with Inoki, this is a big deal, is it not?
Absolutely. He was the king of wrestling in Japan, and there'll be some take exception to that statement because they would say, well, the Giant Baba was the face of wrestling in Japan, and that's an arguable point. But yeah, having a match, simply being booked against Inoki, told the Japanese audience, this big new American brute is something special, or he would not be in the main event against the greatest wrestler in New Japan history, in Antonio Inoki, who also, by the way, was their cowboy Bill Watts. He owned the company. He was the booker. He was a top babyface, whole 9 yards. But for Doc to be anointed as an opponent for Inoki in a main event level match that early in his career was significant.
Without question. He does so well that he goes back in October. His first match back on the 30th is also against Inoki. They go to a double count out. On that tour, he would also wrestle the Great Muta, which Steve won by DQ. And by the end of 86, he's involved in the Pro Wrestling Illustrated $50,000 tournament. Steve goes on to win the tournament, defeating One Man Gang in the finals on December 12th. That brings 86 to an end. This is a banner year for Steve in his career, is it not?
Great year, yeah, great year, Conrad. He started going to Japan was a really a blessing for Steve because he saw a different perspective. He had different opponents. They were all fundamentally sound. Every single guy, to say that how much did it help Doc working with Inoki? Well, it helped him immensely. Again, Inoki had a high skill set. He was very, very over, and so working with the American heel was a natural situation. So Doc was he learned so much there. And the other thing is that's the first time that he made real serious money. And as time progressed, his rate for working in Japan continued to go up and up and up, and because people believed in him, they weren't concerned about, well, this guy didn't have a lot of sizzle, but goddamn, look at the steak. So that's kind of where we were.
Okay, let's talk about 1987. It's Oklahoma City, July 11th. It's the Great American Bash Tour, and Steve gets a win over Big Bubba Rodgers to win the UWF World Title. It's Steve's first singles title in wrestling. What did it mean to him to become top dog here in the UWF?
Well, he achieved a big goal. Again, guys that come from the legitimate or mainstream, better said, athletic background understand how to treat a victory. It was not just look. They say, well, look, it was a showbiz victory. Duh, hello, but it still was an accomplishment that it was perceived at that time by the head honcho, Bill Watts, that Doc was ready. He'd had those tours of Japan. He had done real well. He got great reviews. Cowboy had a lot of stroke with some of the guys in Japan as far as just getting information and communicating, even though Watts didn't like them for whatever reason. But by and large, the report cards were coming back very, very good, very positive. And man, I'll tell you what, those two guys, if you go back and look at you wonder what an athletic super heavyweight match looks like. Take a look at Doc versus Big Bubba Rodgers, who became the big boss man, of course, and his name Ray Trader, passed away too early. But boy, they killed it. They tore that son of a bitch up, and it was just a classic. I can remember so much emotion because the fans had gone on this journey with Doc as well.
Right.
The fans in this region, in that Mid-South region, the UWF region, the old territory, they were very familiar with Doc's background because they heard it on TV every week. And a lot of them were familiar with his success, not only in the wrestling room, but on the football field. So he was a cult type guy. People believed in him. They knew he was legit. And so he wasn't play fighting because he did work a little snug, which was good because Cowboy would not allow him to work any other way. But that was one of the most memorable matches I ever called. And a lot of it was because of the emotional investment I'd already made in Doc. You can't help but love Ray Traylor, Big Bubba Rodgers, with the dust he really created. So it was a really big night for me to call that match. And then we had the big champagne celebration in the back and all those things. It was just, he loved that. He was in his element. He finally had achieved success. And athletes love to achieve success. In other words, they love to win their games. And so Doc, major step in his career to get this opportunity. And he was the right choice at that time. And those guys delivered. And to the late Ray Traylor's credit, Ray Traylor did the honors the way you're supposed to do the honors. He pushed Dr. Death to Doc's limit. He almost had him beat on multiple occasions. Their physicality was measurable, like a earthquake tremor. They were beating the shit out of each other. But Ray did it right. So when Doc won, he really beat somebody of significance that was an imposing challenger that had the opportunity, had it gone just a little bit different here, there, or yon, that Ray Traylor would have won that match. So it was perfectly executed, great booking, great execution by the guys. And the nice thing about that is that in that era, you didn't go to the ring in the afternoon and walk through your match with somebody. That fucking never happened. So they called it in the ring. They knew basically what they wanted to do, and of course Doc was smart enough to let Ray call the match, and because Ray had the most experience. So it was a very memorable night, and I can't encourage people enough to check that out. If you want to see two heavyweights, how do they do it? How did one guy make the other? And how did the match end up? How did you feel when the match was over? So I think that's one that I will go back and watch occasionally because it's one of my favorite calls, and it showed great. It was a great success for Doc. He finally had arrived at his first destination. Not that there would be others, there would be, but that was his first stop off into being the top guy.
He would successfully defend that title at Starrcade 87, picking up a win over Barry Windham. He would never actually lose the title. It becomes deactivated at the end of December of 87 when the UWF was officially purchased by Jim Crockett Promotions and becomes part of the NWA. How did Steve make the transition? How did he fit in with the NWA? Any memories of that transition from his perspective?
I don't know that he was totally happy with the creative. I think he thought that he should be on a plane with any of the other NWA main event guys. I think that was the general malaise of the overall feeling of the UWF. You ask the talents, they'd probably tell you that the sale of the UWF to Jim Crockett Promotions did not help them because they were not they weren't on the right side of the aisle, so to speak. They were the outsiders, and there were people there in NWA that did not want Crockett to spend the money and buy Watts out, and because it wasn't because of their sensibilities of the fact that, well, maybe Jimmy's over investing, he's over speculating, he's using money he didn't really have type thing. Because I don't think Watts ever got all of his money. So in any event, Doc was, I don't think he was totally satisfied with his creative. I think that he was underutilized. The only talents that ended up making it long term in that sale, just off the top of my head, Sting was a UWF guy, and of course he had a wonderful career. Rick Steiner had a long career, especially once he attached himself to his brother Scotty, where they formed one of the best tag teams ever. So I just we didn't have great success in that transition, and I oftentimes will say, and I might be wrong, there were a lot of top stars in NWA that were very, very protective of their TV time and their position that didn't really want the competition, and that they had reached their comfort zone. They'd found their comfort zone. They were making good money. So we don't want anybody to come here and screw up what we got. And I think that was the general consensus of some of these stars. And of course, I think the lack of the creative push for Doc probably was what led him to be leaving there in not too distant future.
Let's also mention that he does get a title shot in May of 88. It's his first one for the NWA world title. He's going to challenge Ric Flair. Steve gets a win by DQ. They'd wrestle twice more over the next 4 days, with Steve winning the other 2 matches also by DQ. It feels like a natural thing to me. Let's take the UWF champion and make him, go belt for belt with the NWA champion. Of course, they go a different direction. What did you think of the matches and the chemistry that he had with Flair?
Well, it was great, and different opponent for Rick. Rick could make anybody look better than they actually were, but they had good chemistry. That could have been a long-term program in my estimation. And things like that was the catalyst of trying to hire Doc to come to WWE to have a one-off program with Austin that never materialized, thanks to the Brawl for it all. But it was it's hard to have a bad match with Nate. So I'd love to see those matches. I'd love to find and maybe you think they're on YouTube or something?
Yeah, they may be out there somewhere. I just know in this era, he's wrestling a lot of times in tag matches against the Horsemen, oftentimes with Sting. It feels like he's right in the conversation. He challenges Mike Rotunda for the TV title many times. But then in 88, we'd also see him turn heel and join the Varsity Club along with Mike Rotunda and Rick Steiner and Kevin Sullivan. What did you think of the decision to turn him heel and have him join the Varsity Club?
A fresh coat of paint, so to speak, new presentation. The Varsity Club is one of my favorite factions of all time. Kevin Sullivan kind of stepped away from his devil worship image. Complete work, by the way, for the former choir boy, Kevin Sullivan. He did a good job of herding the chickens there, so to speak. But, you look at the 3 talents. Rotunda was a great two-sport star in college, great amateur. Doc, four-time All-American in wrestling, played in 4 bowl games, captain of the OU football team, all that good stuff. And then, of course, Steiner was a freak, amateur at Michigan, heavyweight, tougher than hell. So people believed that the varsity club were the real item. And by the way, they were. One of my favorite factions. I think we could have got a lot more mileage out of that than we did, but it just speaks to the unorganization, the lack of communication in WCW at that time. Didn't do Doc any favors, or any of those guys any favors. They had a good thing going. I thought the varsity club was one of our best creations in WCW.
We get a new look for Steve here too. Now that he's a heel, he's going to get a haircut, going to wear a singlet that says Oklahoma in it. And let's fast forward to Starrcade 88. Steve and Kevin Sullivan would defeat the Fantastics to win the United States Tag Team titles. Sullivan, sort of the leader / manager of the group. How do you think he fit in this role? I mean, we've got so many other amateur wrestlers, and he's sort of the taskmaster of it all.
Yeah, Kevin was not the coach, the old offensive line coach, the defensive coordinator type guy, the experienced guy. And again, just from a persona, a presentation standpoint, I think Sully was very, very good for the varsity club. He gave him some leadership, some stability. And Sully also saw, because he had a very good eye for talent, that they were on to something. They certainly were on to something. So Kevin did a nice job in that role, because it was a departure from, his previous incarnations creatively. His TV persona changed to this role. He did a good job, quite frankly. And again, the satanic gimmick was kind of passe and all that crap. So it was good. Kevin did a good job. He was the right man for that role, I really believe.
Let's talk a little bit about what he's doing after he gets into the new year, 1989. We see Steve and Kevin lose these tag team titles, the United States Championship titles, to Eddie Gilbert and a former varsity club member himself, Rick Steiner. That happens on February 28th. And right after that, Steve starts teaming with Mike Rotundo. They have a ton of matches with the world tag champs at the time, the Road Warriors, on house shows. And we even recently covered the Clash of the Champions 6, where Mike and Steve would beat the Road Warriors to win the tag titles. But of course, we know they're going to be stripped after they attack the guest referee, Nikita Koloff. And not too terribly long after this, the varsity club is disbanded, and Dr. Death is now back as a babyface. Why don't you think varsity club had more legs?
They did have more legs. It was politics, and indecisiveness, using not a lot of logic on flipping these personas. The most powerful weapon in wrestling is not Dr. Death's Oklahoma Stampede, the running power slam. It's called the eraser. And it was just thought that Doc was going to be a better babyface than a heel, I guess. I just thought it was poor judgment in hindsight. It's easy to say after the fact, all these things are. But I thought that the varsity club had a lot more longevity, a lot more legs. The thing about the Doc with Rotunda, for example, they were not only great brawlers, but they were, more importantly, they were great wrestling heels. They could actually wrestle, and that gets a lot of heat on a babyface on the crowd rather, with a babyface, when you're beating them and you're laughing about it or you're gloating about it. It's that old psychology works every time. And but I thought that we disbanded the varsity club much too soon.
No doubt about it. At this point, do you think Doc preferred tag team wrestling? I mean, he's been in a tag team for much of his run here in the NWA. Did the NWA not see him as a single star, or what can you tell me about what his preference was?
I think Doc's inability to do a great promo hurt him, and the perception of his skill set was not accurate. The thing. Here's the deal, and how easily that's solved. Can you imagine Dr. Death being the heel champion with Jim Cornette as his manager?
Oh my God.
How simple is that to fix?
Yeah.
But then you got to placate so many people in the booking committee, and everybody's got a dog in the hunt, and they got their buddy they want to help out. And I promise it's got a little push, blah, blah, blah. So it was just, and Doc was not a real political guy. He didn't lobby hard enough maybe for himself. Maybe he didn't squeak loud enough to get greased. But point being is that there was a concern that if you're going to be the champion, you got to be able to cut promos. Because remember, in that era, who the champion was and how well he could talk. His name was Ric Flair. And that's not fair to compare anybody to Ric Flair. If you do, then everybody's going to fall short. So, but I think Doc had rather have been a single. There's more money in the singles. It's kind of like the videos that we showed, we've been seeing on AEW with Scorpio Sky. He's been in a tag team forever. I said this on one of our post-game shows. You're going to make more money as a single than you are as a tag. And so I said, you know, what is Scorpio Sky in the with his team? Are you playing the role of Buddy Roberts? I mean, what are you doing here? So you split a payoff three ways in a tag match in a six-man type scenario with three guys on a unit. It lessens the payoff, their payoff, because there's only going to be so much money allocated for that match. And then if you got to slice that pie up in more slices, guess what? The slices are smaller, and you didn't maximize your minutes, quite frankly. So I think Doc wanted to be a single because the guys he idolized, like Cowboy Bill Watts, Ted DiBiase, so forth and so on, they were guys that made money in the tags. Watts started out in New York as Bruno Sammartino's tag team partner. That's how he got noticed, thanks to Wild Red Barry, who got him the job. So, Steve knew all that legacy and all those stories. He'd heard them all. So I think he'd rather have been a single because, again, Steve was more motivated, and should come as no surprise, by the money than the fame. So, but I do believe that we missed the boat on him. Again, putting him with a guy like Cornette would have been magic, because then he's always got the guy out there, the out. You got a guy that can do the promos. You know, it's like Cornette when he managed Vader.
Right. Exact same.
Same deal. And he was just brilliant at it. And he knew how to position his talent. And so we didn't ever get that far. It was funny about the Midnight Express situation there in WCW anyway. The Midnight Express were the greatest heel teams of all time, without question. They weren't in great favor with Jim Herd, obviously. And nobody understood that logic. Tell me why. And, of course, the answer, well, they've been around too long, and people are tired of seeing them. Well, where do you get that at? You're tired of seeing them. That's all. And it ain't about you, because you're going to watch anyway. And so to take a team like the Midnight Express and de-emphasize them was silly. And then not utilizing Steve Dr. Death Williams, who's right in your face, a young, big, strong, athletic son of a gun. It just was illogical. And I think Doc had figured that too. What am I doing wrong? Really, you're not doing anything wrong. But your deficiency, the one deficiency that we perceive that you have, can be remedied with a manager, a good manager. And we had the best manager in the business at that time, who I guarantee you Cornette would have been more than happy to help Doc, without a doubt. And that would have been nothing but money.
Well, unfortunately, that's not on the docket, but he was supposed to face Lex Luger for the United States Championship at Wrestle War 1990 on February 25th. However, as you may recall, Sting, who was supposed to wrestle Ric Flair for the world title that same night, suffers a knee injury. So they have Luger turn babyface and move from the United States match up to the world title match in Sting's place. So somewhere in this area is when Steve says, okay, that's enough. He leaves the NWA, goes to All Japan Pro Wrestling. What leads to him making this decision here?
Two things, two C's, cash and creative. For the time you invest in All Japan, he went from Inoki's New Japan and become a star there and had those countouts with Inoki, those battles that they had. So he was already quote unquote over in Japan. And Mr. Baba, being a very smart man, saw money and saw big money. So the offer for Doc to come in on his weekly was a significant increase in what he made for Inoki. And not that Inoki didn't pay him well, he did, but Baba just really, really wanted him to come back and work for All Japan, not New Japan. So I think money was the one idea, and the fact that in Japan, the The politics are have lessened a little bit on how they perceive things and how they approach things still this very day. So I think this cash and creative motivated Doc to take the money. And when you look at it, even though you're doing all that travel, getting to Japan, et cetera, the point I'm making is that it's really not a full-time gig. So all of a sudden you're making a whole lot more money than you were making in the States on a full-time gig. And now you're making more money on a gig that doesn't require as much time. So you go work 2 or 3 weeks, you're back home for 2 or 3 weeks or whatever it is. So there's those extended off periods of time that you could be with family, you could heal, you could train. You know, I know Doc bought I think at that time, somewhere in that era, he bought a condo in Maui. And so he'd sometimes after his Japanese trip, he'd just fly back, shorter trip than flying back to Louisiana. He'd fly to Hawaii and stay there, which is not a bad place to do R&R. So he's making some pretty good decisions there. But I think that was just cash and creative, Conrad.
Talk to me a little bit about him teaming with Terry Gordy. While he's over here in Japan, Giant Baba decides to make these guys a team. They become known as the Miracle Violence Connection. They end up going down as one of the greatest tag teams in all of wrestling history there in Japan, and I guess the world over. I mean, they're totally dominating the division. They're beating teams like Stan Hansen and Danny Spivey, Jumbo Tsuruta and Kenta Kobashi, as well as Doug Furness and Dan Crofot, who we know as Phil LaFawn in the WWF. I mean, just one big name after another. I mean, you set them up and Dokken Gordie knock them down, right?
Yeah, and Mr. Baba had great respect for those two guys and high expectations. And he knew how to get talent over. He, meaning Mr. Baba. You beat stars. And their philosophy was that it's a sporting event. And in a sporting event, it should be positioned that anybody can win and anybody can lose. And the finish is not obvious. So all those guys that you just mentioned, Conrad, those great teams that you talked about, they were all stars. They were all established and over. So Mr. Baba bringing in a Doc and putting him with Terry Gordy was magic. And that really created a dynamic that we haven't really seen since that time. Two big 300-pound guys. And I'm not going crazy over size because these are athletic guys. People remember how athletic Terry Gordy was. He could drop kick. He could move around, and he was self-trained. He'd been in the business a long time by that time. Still young, but he started as a teenager, 16 years old or something, 15 or 16. And then you had Doc with all his gifts, physical gifts. So Mr. Bob had a great eye for talent, and he had even a better eye on what he perceived, and he was right more often than not, what would draw. And Doc and Gordie drew money in Japan because you couldn't see through their work. They were not prototypical pro wrestlers. They looked different. They moved differently. And because generally when you got 300-pound guys, they're sometimes a little heavy in the feet. And these guys are so athletic that they would awe people with their quickness and their movement in the ring. They were not Clydesdales. Gordie and Doc were thoroughbreds, and they proved that night in and night out for Mr. Baba.
Let's talk a little bit about him popping back over to the States in September of 90. He's going to appear at the UWF television taping, and he's going to get a win over little Davey Meltzer. Herb Abrams, the guy who we learned about on Dark Side of the Ring last week, had booked Dr. Death. And I guess because Meltzer had taken a lot of Abrams' claims to task and sort of challenged them in the Observer, Abrams decides to have a little fun. So he has an enhancement talent out there that he's going to call Davey Meltzer. And after Dr. Death hits the Oklahoma Stampede on him, he's going to take a sheet of paper and stuff it in his mouth and then take a bag of dirt and dump it all over him. Dirt sheet. Get it? Haha. What the fuck is this, Jim? This is some silly shit here, is it not?
Herb Abrams is the answer. I mean, come on. He wasn't sane, I don't think, the way his lifestyle was and his drug use and all his penchant for prostitutes and spending money he didn't have and all these things. It was not a shining moment for our profession. But Doc came back home. He was off. and he got paid. I'm sure he got paid very well. And knowing Doc, he sure as hell got his money, because the one thing you don't want to do is go to the locker room and say, "Well, I don't have your money," to Dr. Destiny Williams. That would not have been a very pleasant conversation to have. So it was just Herb Abrams' insanity and craziness. Look, the last Cornette might say the last original idea that Herb Abrams had died of loneliness, because he steals the UWF name, which he could do legally, because for whatever reason it wasn't trademarked, it wasn't registered. Don't know why. Falling through the crack type thing, but that was, I don't think, he and I talked about that. It was just Conrad and Cynthia payday.
Right.
That's all. And when he got there, he didn't know, he didn't book himself against, Davey Meltzer.
Right.
That's what Herb Abrams did. So it was just a payday. Simple as that. Pick up a payday while you're back in the States, and off they went. So short-lived, but it was certainly memorable in that regard.
He pops back over to Japan, and he's working for All Japan here and working with some all-time greats: Terry Funk, Johnny Ace, Dynamite Kid, Johnny Smith, Doug Furnace, Dan Spivey, so many. And then we round out the year 1990 on December 7th. We see Steve and Terry win the Real World Tag League tournament, defeating Danny Spivey and Stan Hansen in the tournament finals. They're going to become the AJPW, the All Japan Pro Wrestling Tag Team Champs. This is a pretty big deal. In this era, All Japan was known for having the best wrestling in the world, bell to bell, correct?
Yep, sure were. Yep, they sure were. And they fit the bill for what Mr. Baba was presenting: reality-based, hard-hitting, athletic presentation within the pro wrestling confines. It's a great formula. It works. It will still work. It does still work when you find a company that is of that mindset. But beating to win that was an anointment. That's like getting if you're in the United Kingdom, getting knighted, or getting a lordship or something. It was like you're here. You've been anointed as the best tag team in the company, and with that comes great responsibility, because you're not going to have a lot of enhancement matches. You're going to have matches that are the main event level, because that's what a main event level guy would do. He would wrestle other main eventers, and so I don't think Bobby was so dependent on the jobber. I hate that term, but the preliminary match, a squash match type scenario. So every night that Gordie and Doc joined forces as the champions, they were up against another big time team that realistically could beat them. Right. And that's what made the athletic competition so unique and so desirable, especially in that era.
Let's talk a little bit about what he's doing here with All Japan, and then sort of bouncing back and forth. We mentioned that he wins the tag titles. Well, he's going to drop them in April to Spivey and Hansen, but then they're going to gain them back in July. But somewhere in the middle there, they have a pretty notable match. Dokken Gordie against Andre the Giant and Kenta Kobashi. That doesn't seem like that should have really happened, man. That's unbelievable.
It is, right? Andre is the difference maker. He's the large straw that stirs that drink. And Kobashi was just a legend. I mean, he's still considered one of the best, and he's still the favorite Japanese wrestler for a lot of old school fans. So that win, just basically the booking of that in April the 8th of 91, after winning the titles in December of 1990, that was again a confirmation of confidence and faith from the head honcho, but because you just didn't beat Andre and Kobashi and it not be significant. That was a major win. Again, telling everybody that these guys are bad dudes. And then the booking continued, as you mentioned a minute ago, where April the 18th, Spivey and Stan they beat Dokken Gordie for the titles. And so it was just well booked and well executed. And again, never a night off. They're always wrestling a top team. Andre and Kobashi, wow. Stan Hansen and a healthy Dan Spivey, wow. So it was good stuff, man. It was good, and because Gordie and Doc were so legitimately tough, and they had those great motors. Everybody wanted to work with them because they knew the matches are going to be so well received. And I don't remember any Gordie and Doc match that wasn't well received. There may have been one here, there, and yon, but I don't recall it off the top of my head. They were just that consistent and that damn good.
Let's talk a little bit about, in between these runs in Japan, he's still back over here with the UWF, including June 9th, 1991, the UWF Beach Brawl pay-per-view. Steve's going to beat Bam Bam Bigelow to win the vacant UWF TV title. For whatever reason, Herb Abrams really likes booking Doc. Do you think it's because of the association with the original real UWF, or he just knew great wrestling talent and Doc wasn't under contract anywhere in the States? Or what's the thinking as to why this continued to work, Doc and Herb Abrams UWF?
Well, looking at borrowing the UWF name that Herb Abrams did and having an athlete on the elite level that Dr. Death was, and knowing that he built his reputation in UWF, it was a natural marriage if you're going to use that name. So I don't know that that Herb Abrams had a great gift for spotting great talent. I don't know that they've made any stars in this incarnation of the UWF, any new stars. They may have. I don't know. I don't think they did. So Doc was already established. He had the UWF, the original UWF reputation, legacy, association. So I just think it helped promote that wannabe brand that, of course, as we know by as you mentioned, watching Dark Side of the Ring, didn't last that long.
No, not at all. Well, I don't know how much of the Japan stuff you were really there for, or that we want to sort of run through, but let's just say he's become a legendary tag team wrestler here, competing in this Real World Tag League tournament again in 91. During that tournament run, he picks up a win over Andre the Giant and Giant Baba. They make it to the finals. They beat Misawa and Kawada to win the tournament again. And by the way, if you're out of the loop, I can't recommend going to watch a match like that enough. Just the four players, Dokken Gordie against Misawa and Kawada, is just out of this world. Once you get into 92, they are going to drop those tag titles in March. But what's most important from our standpoint is he's coming back to America, baby. And WCW is going to host the NWA World Tag Team Turtle Tournament. And Dokken Gordie are knee deep in it. They come back for the Clash of the Champions 19 on June 16th. It's round one of the tournament, essentially a squash match. But later that night, they defeat the Steiner brothers in the quarterfinals. And that was a surprising result to a lot of fans in the day. The Steiner brothers had, not been losing a lot. And so when you see these two guys from Japan come in, even though they're American, they hadn't been on WCW TV in a little while, and they pick up a win over the Steiners. Hell of a match. Four hard hitting, down and dirty, old school wrestling guys. But I think most fans, myself included, the Steiners are going to win this, but that wasn't the result.
Yeah. Before the social media craze that we're living in now, Meltzer always had a great pipeline for Japanese information and results and news. But everybody didn't read the Observer. It wasn't a mainstream thing, and there wasn't any Twitter or Instagram and all that stuff to promote with. So a lot of folks they knew who Doc was, and they certainly knew who Gordie was, but they hadn't seen them. So are they as good as they used to be, or they're just, they had been on TV. So, but they quickly showed everybody they were legitimate. They were the real deal. And, but you're right, beating the Steiners. And the great thing about that is that you got a team like the Steiners who were on a real roll. They weren't, as you said, they were not losing very often. They were getting over, they were building momentum. But when it came to working with Dokken Gordie, because of the mutual respect the four men had for each other, their matches were just absolutely amazing. And sometimes when you see matches that are great, we recently talked about 1989 with Flair and Steamboat and Music City Showdown, or whatever it was called, in Nashville. You see great matches generally tell me that both talents have their egos, in this case, or the talents have their egos in check, and they're willing to be cooperative and giving and sharing the spotlight and telling a great story. And that's what those guys did. They had great chemistry. They liked each other. All four guys liked each other because they had that mutual thing in common. They're all tough son of a bitches. And sometimes those tough guys like that, they'll look at a guy that's playing the role of a pro wrestler and kind of roll their eyes. There was no eye rolling with these four guys. They knew that there's going to be a hard-hitting match. They knew that it was going to be physical. There'll be some prices to pay. But in the process, they're going to tell a great story. And those guys told great stories. Some of my favorite matches I ever called were Dokken Gordie versus the Steiners.
Well, you got to see it if you were at the house show on July 5th. Dokken Gordie beat the Steiners. It's a house show, but we see a title switch here. They beat the Steiners for the WCW World Tag Team Championships. And then on the July 12th Great American Bash pay-per-view, they defeat Dustin Rhodes and Barry Windham to win the NWA World Tag Team titles. So now Dokken Gordie are not only the WCW World Tag Champs, but also the NWA. And in the following weeks, they go on to successfully defend the unified tag team titles against the Steiners on a bunch of house shows. But come August, they're ready to head back to Japan for All Japan. And they come back in September and they pick up a win over Arn Anderson and Bobby Eaton on the house show loops. And then on the September 21st, 1992 episode of WCW Saturday Night, Dokken Gordie shockingly lose these tag titles to Barry Windham and Dustin Rhodes. And they're finishing up here and going back to Japan. Talk to me about why this didn't have a longer run. I mean, they clearly are setting the territory on fire as far as accolades. Was business down and they just weren't happy with the money or the style or the creative, or what was it?
I think they had commitments and a strong loyalty to Mr. Bubba. And Gordie and Doc both learned that largely through working for Cowboy. They had confidence in the booking. They had strong leadership. They were being managed or led by another alpha male that had been there and done that and had great success. So, and I think they felt the same feeling respectfully to Mr. Bubba. He'd paid him an awful lot of money. And look, you can't complain about the booking that Dokken Gordie had, certainly in Japan. They beat, look, when you start beating Andre and you start beating Andre and the Giant Baba together, good Lord. And you beating Stan Hansen was a god there, still is. And Dan Spivey, that team was over as well. Then all these other great Japanese teams they fought was pretty amazing. So I think it was the fact that they had a commitment. I think was Cowboy booking at that time, or the head honcho in '92?
Yeah,
I think he was. And Bill understood that, and so he just worked around it. Where other guys said, well, they're going to be going to Japan. We can't get anything going with them because they're going to go to Japan. That's bullshit. And look, you're storyboarding. You know when they're leaving. You know when your last TV for them will be. You plan around it. And Watts was really, really good at that because he'd bring guys in to Mid-South on a one-off here or one-off there. Andre was one of those guys. Dusty was one of those guys. And he always had a good way of planning to be able to use these outside, quote-unquote, outside stars to enhance our cards on our big shows, especially the ones that were in the Superdome. So I think it's nothing more than they were getting what they were agreed to work for in WCW, in the NWA thing. But their big money and their loyalty
Japan
was to Mr. Bubba.
Well, we see them come back. Well, when I say them, Steve comes back, Halloween Havoc 92. It's supposed to be him and Gordie getting a return against Rhodes and Windham, but Terry can't make it. So Doc, has him replaced by Steve Austin. So technically it's Steve Williams and Steve Williams taking on Barry Windham and Dustin Rhodes. They go to a 30-minute time limit draw. And Austin has said he was home on a four-wheeler when he gets the call to come in and wrestle that night. What do you remember about this time limit draw here with both of your pals, Steve Williams?
Yeah, absolutely. Steve Williams times two. Well, we were disappointed. I can't remember exactly why Terry couldn't make it. I don't know if he had an injury or there were travel issues or what was going on. I really don't remember. It was a disappointment because we had built that thing up so much with Dokken Gordie. But great opportunity for Stone Cold, who's not Stone Cold at that time. He was Stunning Steve, to get some nice positioning on the card. And I'd forgotten about that match till I went back and saw it. But yeah, it was just a unfortunate thing. I don't think it was not anything suspicious or conspiracy theorist type stuff. I think it was a very legitimate, as I recall, a very legitimate reason. And it could, again, I can't remember if it was an injury or if it was travel. But unfortunately, Terry didn't make it. But good opportunity for Austin to get some shine and to get his face on television. And but that was, I think that was I don't know if they ever, I can't remember if they wrestled ever together again or not. I don't recall it. They might have in that era.
I don't remember that either. He's back to Japan afterwards, of course, reforming his team with Terry Gordy, but he pops back over to WCW for Starrcade 92. This is when they did that lethal lottery concept. Either way, he winds up getting a shot against the world champion, Ron Simmons. Ron winds up winning by DQ in 15 minutes and 12 seconds. That's Bill Watts booking all day right there, is it not? Ron Simmons and Dr. Death?
Yeah, and we told that story on television too, because Doc was playing offensive guard. Ron Simmons was the All-American nose tackle for Florida State. They played in 2 Orange Bowls against each other. And I vividly remember Barry Switzer talking on television, the head coach at OU at the time, that the key to us winning the Orange Bowl is how are we going to block Ron Simmons? I think it was number 50. How do we block 50? And so then I talked to Ron about that later on. He got a chuckle out of it. He said, man, your boy chop blocked my ass. He hit me late. He was physical. It's nasty. Talking about Doc, because Doc had the fear of God put in by the head coach that you got to control this guy. We cannot let him beat us. And that's going to be largely on your shoulders, Steve. So he took it personally. And they had some real wars there. So we went back, and of course, we probably embellished a little bit, but we went back and told that story that they had a rivalry, a physical rivalry since college. And it played well for the audience. The audience could get that. They could relate to that. But I remember that two magnificent studs, man, in Simmons and Doc. It was a beautiful booking, quite frankly. But he was in his element there. Single matches, as we talked about earlier, even though he had great success with Gordie, maybe his greatest success was with Terry Gordie because of the Japan experience. But quite frankly, I think Doc had always, like most guys, they want that singles run. I remember one time Cowboy telling Stan Hansen and Bruiser Brody, who was called Frank Goodish at the time, that, he said that they were a tag team in Mid-South, young, crazy. It's early 70s. I was just getting in the business in 74. But they were around there in that early dirty days. And I remember Cowboy telling them that I'm getting ready to book you guys as singles. And they believed, they meaning Stan and Frank Goodish, that their money was together. They would make more money as a tag team than they ever would as a single. Well, we know how that formula works. They went to Memphis. They left our territory, went to Memphis, I think. And somewhere along the way, they got into singles matches and realized the payoffs are better per capita than sharing the match payoff with another person. And then you got to share that payoff with another team. That's 4 people getting sharing a payoff in that slot. So, but that was one of those interesting scenarios, because go back and look at the history in Japan and how big Brody got as a single and how big Hansen got as a single, because you can always put them together. You can always put them together. That's even a big bonus. So they were just a magic in that regard. So the tag team thing was great, but Doc always, I think, yearned to be a singles champion. And again, the downfall was his verbal skills. What he said was real, but for whatever reason, he would get, he wasn't, you could see he wasn't really comfortable doing it. And I don't know that he ever wanted to be himself as much as trying to what he thought he's supposed to be. And that was a matter of coaching up. And, I think if Doc had been around Cowboy longer in that singles role, that Bill would have got him over the hump as far as cutting a promo and how you do it. But that was kind of the Doc's only Achilles heel, was the promo side of it.
January 30th, 1993, Dokken Gordie beat Misawa and Kawada for those AJPW tag titles, and they hold them until May 20th. And not long after this, Steve and Terry's team unfortunately has to break up because Terry suffers a stroke, puts him out of wrestling for a while, and Steve starts teaming up with Big Bubba Rodgers. Man, it feels like these guys have all the momentum in the world, and this is not exactly his plan for Dr. Death, huh?
No, had to get to Plan B very quickly, losing his, at least temporarily, losing his partner. But the salvation there was that Mr. Baba had Big Bubba, aka the Big Boss Man, on his roster. And going back all the way back to the day that Bubba and Steve had that UWF finals match to determine the first champion, or determine the championship, because Gordie was the first champion, and he beat Doc, ironically, as we said. At least that was a salvation for Doc, because he didn't lose his spot on the card because his partner was inactive or unable to participate, and the guy that we got to replace him wasn't nearly as good. I'm not telling you that the Big Boss Man was better than Terry Gordy, because very few, I can't say that about hardly anybody that I can think of right now, but he was a hell of a hand, and he was a main event guy. He was a veteran. He was big, and he was athletic. So really, there was a drop off, but there wasn't a massive drop off, quite frankly.
Well, it doesn't really matter because he's finally getting his wish. July 7th, 1994, Dr. Death would defeat Misawa to win the AJPW Triple Crown Championship. The Triple Crown consisted of the PWF World Title, the NWA United National Title, and the NWA International Heavyweight Title. It's also worth mentioning that Steve's also the UWF Heavyweight Champion in the States at this time. He picked up a win over Sid Vicious by DQ to retain the title on September 23rd. I think that was at MGM Grand, and there were 200 people there. So, yeah. Either way, though, you've been talking about it. He was a tag team guy, but longing for his singles run and beating Misawa for the Triple Crown. That's about as high of an honor as you can get in wrestling in 1994, is it not?
Yeah, Misawa was like beating Stone Cold in his peak, and Misawa was the guy. And some of the matches that Doc and Misawa had were absolutely cringe-worthy, not in a bad way. Like, oh my God, this physicality. And Doc's suplex, the Doctor Driver, was a staple of that whole situation. And unfortunately, sometimes the good doctor would get a little carried away and may drop somebody on their head. And how Misawa survived all that brutalization was a testament to Misawa's toughness. A great skill set, man. He was really, really good. And the Dr. Death Misawa matches is another trip down memory lane that the real old school fans probably would get a kick out of watching. And that's certainly a YouTube search or something along those lines. Dr. Death versus Misawa. Great stuff, man. And I'd say this, and I'm a big proponent of this, that a lot of today's wrestlers should be looking, watching, studying more specifically some of those contests. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn some things not to do, but you're going to learn a lot of things that really, really work, that are very simple and very straightforward, because they're plausible and they're realistic, and they're not screwing with you as far as making you try to believe that a play fight is as serious as what Dr. Death did and some of these other guys, Misawa, for example. You couldn't see through their stuff. They were real dudes. And that was a big thing. I would say that Doc probably never had a bigger win anywhere than the Triple Crown in All Japan. It was a huge honor to be anointed that, and to have the best guy in the territory put you over to win that championship was significant, and just proved once again, which again led to the loyalty to Baba, that Baba, when he believed in you, you're going to get your chance. Just keep doing the good things you do, keep having great performances, be solid, be physical, and good things will happen. And so there's a great loyalty to Mr. Baba for a lot of guys because of that.
Well, and you can see why. I mean, it was the highest honor at the time by far. Unfortunately, Doc doesn't keep it forever. He loses it October 22nd to Kawada. And around this time, we would see Dr. Death start teaming with Johnny Ace very successfully. They get a lot of wins, and they even wrestle some odd combinations, like Rob Van Dam teaming with Stan Hansen, which I wouldn't have ever guessed happened.
Yeah, that's a unique booking, isn't it?
Very much so. Let's talk about August of 96. we see him pop up in the new hot promotion called ECW. This was definitely the promotion that had the most buzz by August of 96 as far as the independents. He and Tommy Dreamer would lose to Taz and Brian Lee, but quite a coup. You got this well-educated Philadelphia audience, that hardcore ECW arena fan base. They were very familiar with who Dr. Death was, right?
Yeah, and you remember he had been on TVS. He wasn't somebody that was a stranger, and the ECW audience were certainly unique, educated, and knew what the score was. So yeah, Paul Eden did a nice job of getting Steve in, and it created another new payday, and he was an asset in that company, no doubt about it. I don't know how he fit with the hardcore stuff and the trash cans and tables and ladders and chairs. Oh my! But they knew he was a bad MFer, and that he was the legitimate item. Don't screw with him, and that's kind of what it takes. That fear, that respect factor. That hey, these other guys might be play fighting, but that son of a bitch right there ain't.
He has an interesting couple of years here, sort of bouncing around a little bit. He's teaming with Johnny Ace. He's going to win the tag titles in All Japan, with Johnny Ace. And he even does a lot of indies in America, high profile shots, including one in Dallas, Texas for the CWA, where he would team with his old football teammate, Marcus Dupree and Steve Cox, to beat Scott Putski, Black Bart, and Bobby Duncombe. This feels like this would have been right up your wheelhouse, Marcus Dupree in a tag match.
Yeah, and Steve Cox was another watch protege that really was kind of off the radar. But Steve was a good-looking guy, had a great body, kind of reminded me of the physique of Paul Orndorff. And Steve was a former football starter at the University of Tulsa. So you had the Marcus Dupree, Oklahoma Sooner legacy, Steve Cox, the Tulsa, Oklahoma legacy, and of course the good doctor. And then ironically, Putski, Black Bart, and Bobby Duncombe Jr. were all Texans. So you had that natural rivalry that fans in that region could actually understand and get into.
He's going to continue to do some shots for ECW. But the most notable thing I should mention is he actually takes a pinfall loss to Raven, of all people, crossing the line again. Happened February 1st, 1997. And on this show, we would see Doc make short work of Axel Rotten and then challenge Raven for the ECW world title. And Raven picks up a pinfall victory. And I think this is the first time Doc had been pinned in the United States since 87. So like almost 10 years. Do you know, what the thinking here is? Is this just Paul Lee wanting to legitimize his champion a little more? And hey, I know you don't normally lose here in the States, but what if I made it worth your while?
Pretty much. Yeah. Paul was smart enough to know that Doc was not going to be full time for long term because of his New Japan, or excuse me, his All Japan relationship and his legacy there. So he knew that Raven, Scotty Levy, was probably going to be was going to be around. And so it was smart booking on Paul's part. But, Doc was not against putting people over. It's just that's just how he was booked. That's why a lot of those situations when we talked earlier about his matches he had with Flair, I think they all ended in a DQ. And Doc never took a pinfall loss, which I would not have booked it that way. If the world champion can't beat you, then, something's wrong here. And somebody with a high skill set like Flair should be able to beat anybody by hook or crook or whatever it may be. But I thought that was not a smart move. All these DQ finishes, I'm not a big fan of them, as you can tell. To me, it's lazy booking, quite frankly. You can't figure out a finish. Well, let's just throw it out. And I think that's a lazy, cheap-ass way of doing business, quite frankly. The DQs are good if you're going somewhere with it. But more often than not, it's just a way to placate talents. Dr. Death did not need placating to do the honors. And the money for Paul was smart. He knew that Raven's staying, Doc's going. That's how you do business. And Doc had been raised the right way within the pro wrestling business. And if Cowboy Bill Watts had heard that Doc would refuse to put somebody over, there would have been a trip to the woodshed, figuratively, for Doc and Cowboy, because that's just not the way that he was brought into the business. You do your job. And if you're going to take Paul Heyman's money, then whether you like it or you don't, you do what he wants you to do on this night. And if it's unattainable and you don't like it that much, just don't go back. But don't no show and don't refuse to do the honors for somebody that's trying to build their territory.
Let's talk about July 25th, 1997. Steve's going to team up with Gary Albright, and they're going to win over Johnny Ace and Kenta Kobashi to win the tag titles again in All Japan. They drop them back October 4th, again to Ace and Kobashi. And that gets us to 1998. Steve's going to come to the World Wrestling Federation for the very first time. This has your fingerprints all over it. Talk to me about how this came to be.
Well, Bruce Pritchard and I were working in the office, and both of us had great familiarity with Doc. He was a guy that we liked. We thought we could depend on. His reliability, his toughness, and all that stuff was just beyond compare. And we were running out of opponents. I used this analogy before, much like we were running out of opponents for The Undertaker. And then Vince reluctantly let me sign Mick Foley. So I said, we need opponents. And I kind of took that philosophy. And the illustration I gave Vince that time, I said, I know you're not a big mainstream sports fan, but if you are in the NBA Western Conference at that time, you got to be able to beat the Lakers. And to be able to beat the Lakers, you got to have a defensive player that can match up with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, because he was their guy. He was the difference maker. He needed to win the division, to get to the playoffs and get to the promised land. You got to beat the Lakers, and to beat the Lakers, you got to cover Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Same thing with Undertaker. We were running out of viable opponents. That's how I convinced Vince to sign Mick, and let me sign Mick, and we did, and the rest of it worked out really well for everybody. So I think the same thing here. We thought Austin needed a fresh opponent, somebody that would propose a physical and image, a challenge to Steve Austin, the Stone Cold. And that was the idea. And it didn't have anything to do with, the winner of the Brawl for All gets it. I don't know where that story came from. That's the biggest crock of shit that there is. There was never any discussion, and I'm sure Bruce would back me up on this deal. There was never a deal made that when Doc wins the Brawl for It All, because the Brawl for It All, we brought Doc in, was not. It was a concept. So, but we thought that if we got Doc ready, and he was healthy, we'd get one nice run and maybe a pay-per-view main event with Doc and Stone Cold. That was the idea. Simply to get another opponent for Austin, and for a one-off deal. I think we paid Doc like $300,000 or $400,000, I think it was. And he wanted to come to WWF. He was the big time, and he had never been there, and all that good stuff. So another challenge for him in a different locker room. But his reputation preceded him. Look, a lot of the boys knew how great Misawa and all those other cats were in All Japan, and Doc had been booked with them, and on top with them. They had put him over. He was a big star, but obviously injuries and the strong style that they compete in, the stiffness was taking its toll on him. So we knew that he was on the other side of his greatest years, but we thought that there was enough gas in the tank to get us a one-off program with Stone Cold and get Stone Cold a very significant and viable win. There was never going to be any issue with that. The finish was with Austin and Dr. Death. Doc was fine. But the Brawl for It All really cut the legs out of all that whole plan of maybe getting Doc ready if we got him over, to work with Austin. And if Austin was agreeable, because Doc was a very physical, and a lot of guys, he intimidated a lot of guys. I'm not saying he intimidated Stone Cold. I'm just saying that his reputation preceded him. He's a brute, and he's going to work snug. And a lot of guys loved that, and some guys were leery of it because they saw those doctor drivers on Misawa, and they sure as hell didn't want any part of that.
Let's keep it moving. Let's talk about April 28th. It's his first match in the WWF. He defeats Too Cold Scorpio. He does briefly return to Japan for a few weeks to team up with Gary Albright in several matches, but he's back in time to compete in the Brawl for All. We just recently saw all about this on the Dark Side of the Ring. That's the reason it's so topical, I suppose. July 14th, he would pick up a win over Pierre, who we now know was PCO in the Brawl for All. The next week, he would face Bart Gunn. It all sort of changes that day. Bart Gunn picks up the win. He's knocked out. Steve tears his hamstring in the process. You're doing commentary. What are you thinking as this is happening right in front of you?
Well, I couldn't diagnose him. I knew he was hurt. You could tell by the grimace on his face. I knew something was wrong. Something was wrong big time. And then when he found out the diagnosis, that the hamstring tore completely off the bone and rolled up his leg, and he continued to fight, that's Dr. Death. A lot of guys would throw the towel in, the referee to give the X signal, this is over, get us some medical help out here. But the hard-headed son of a bitch kept fighting, and then he got his ass knocked out because his hands are down. What does a one-legged man do in an ass-kicking contest, Conrad? you don't fare very well. So right. That was a setback. One of the many setbacks that we encountered through the Brawl for It All, but that injury ostensibly ended Steve's career in WWF and for all practical intent and purposes on a major level. And that was a goddamn shame. It was really a shame. And again, I look back at that Brawl for It All as a complete waste of time. I don't give two shits if it did great minute by minutes or quarter-hour ratings. It affected the lives and the livelihood of more than one athlete. And that's not good booking. That's not great creative, in my estimation. So it was heartbreaking. Once again, well, here's what happened. Here's the diagnosis. So he's got to have his quadricep. The quadricep is called in anatomy the quadricep femoris, and it means the four-headed thigh muscle, and that is the largest muscle in your entire body, your thigh, and he ripped it completely off, rolled up his leg, and how the son of a bitch dealt with the pain, the restriction, and his own career mortality was pretty damned amazing. I can tell you that, because he didn't say, you got to stop it. He kept got up, one-legged. It's disturbing to watch. And then all of a sudden, of course, Bart with that great left hand, kaboom, and down goes the doctor. The doctor is no longer in service.
He's back in the ring on October 24th, 1998 for the NWA 50th anniversary show. He's going to win a battle royal here. Tons of talent in that battle royal. Kurt Angle, Test, Sean Stasiak, Steve Corino, Teddy Hart, Tom Pritchard, Giant Silva, Tiger Ali Singh, Glenn Kolka, lots of names you would recognize. By January of 99, he's back with the WWF. He's going to win a dark match over Bob Holly before Sunday Night Heat. And then, and I guess we need to talk about the creative here. You start managing him. Tell me how this comes to be.
Well, it was a creative idea, and I was not comfortable doing it. Didn't see any reason to do it, but that was not the consensus there. It was another way to make JR uncomfortable. But the issue was, for me, that I made it not about JR, even though I didn't like the casting, i.e. the booking. Didn't want to do that. To me, it was just another step in trying to pry me out of the announce position on Monday Night Raw. Hence the little announce table. Doc was my bodyguard, all this stuff. It just was silly, because who was the heat on? Who was the object of getting the heat? Me. I'm not going to wrestle. I ended up doing some shit in the ring. It wasn't wrestling. It was just a cow and ice bullshit. But with the wrong guy, I was getting the spotlight. I didn't need it. Didn't want it. But I thought if I did this and it would help Doc,
right,
I'm willing to do it. But I also knew that the underlying current was, this is not to help Doc. This is to make JR uncomfortable and be embarrassed. And the ribs, the rib on JR is just a continuation of previous ribs and subsequent ribs going forward, because Vince enjoyed that. And when the writers find out what Vince enjoys, that's what they write. They want to ingratiate themselves in the sycophant way that they are, because Vince likes this, so I know I can get this idea through. So there we went. So the priority, the focus was on the wrong guy. It wasn't designed to help Doc. I don't care what anybody says. Because how could you, in any sane way, perceive that this is going to get Doc over?
Right.
It's not. So again, but again, if it would, and maybe I've been wrong, I'm going to try it. For Doc's sake, I'm going to give this my best effort. But it was a stupid creative positioning in my estimation.
Here's something else that's a little silly. He appears on the February 22nd, 99 Raw as a masked man and throws Bart Gunn off the stage. What was the plan for this going to be? Was Steve going to get a pay-per-view win over Bart at some point? Or what's the thinking?
I'm not sure what the thinking was. And I don't know if there was any long-term plan with that deal. Obviously, the fact that, you could always give Bart the credit for hurting Doc and the leg and all that stuff, the leg, the hamstring, all that shit, the quad. But I don't know what the end game was of that deal. Was they're going to, because a match with Doc and Bart Gunn, and all due respect to both guys, just doesn't light up the marquee in my estimation.
No, it doesn't. But the thing is, it's weird because it feels like they're at least trying to give him some sort of a push here on the March 15th, 99 episode of Sunday Night Heat. And again, I realize we're on Sunday Night Heat, but Steve wins in a handicap match against the Hardy Boys. I mean, obviously the Hardy Boys aren't the mega stars here in March of 99 that they would become just later that same year. But my goodness, a handicap win over these guys. But he's not long for this world. He's released at the end of April 99, ironically with Bart Gunn and several others. This feels like just a pattern for WWE. They get through WrestleMania, and then sometime in April, a lot of people are getting their walking papers, huh?
Yeah, it's kind of a tradition. And you got to purge your roster from time to time. You got to, wrestling fans love new things. They love new things that they can emotionally invest within. And so I'm not, the recent WWE layoffs certainly were disheartening for a lot of the talents and their families. But look, it's a necessary evil, unfortunately, that's going to happen from time to time, no matter the physical or the financial health of a company. WWE is a very healthy company financially. Their quarterly statement the last time was positive. The stock went up. That's what they expected to happen, and so the value of the company increased. So they weren't really in any major financial issues, based on the numbers, the public information of a publicly traded company. But that's not unusual. That was the hardest one I ever had to do release wise. There are a lot of them. None of them are fun. None of them are, good experiences by and large. All you can do is talk like I'm talking to you right now, and don't be a bully. Don't be an asshole. Have empathy and understanding. Let the talents talk. They're going to vent. They're going to be pissed off, and you got to, just like Vince would say, you got to learn to. I'm sure Bruce has said this. You got to learn to acquire the taste for eating shit. No, it ain't fun. It's never going to taste good, but you better learn to at least tolerate it, because that's what's going to happen here a lot. So that was the deal there. I wrote in my book, Under the Black Hat, that, Jan was a big help in that regard, because she saw how conflicted I was. I mean, Conrad, I was to the point where I didn't know if I still really wanted to do that job as the head of talent relations. I just felt like we were making an erroneous decision, and we could have got some mileage out of Doc if it had been prioritized. But again, when you're older and you have injury issues, notwithstanding a very expensive reattached quad, now you're damaged goods. You don't have youth going for you. I understand the logic of doing it, but it was just the practical application of it. It broke my heart to because I knew when we let Doc go that, quite honestly, and I never told him this, obviously, that it was pretty much over. He's going to piecemeal things together here, there, and yon as best he could, but he's never going to be the same old Dr. Death, the invincible battering ram, a monster of a man. Those days were gone. His body was starting to break down. The style in Japan, the travel, Doc's lifestyle sometimes didn't do him any favors. But I knew at that point in time that I'm not only releasing him, I'm also probably, for the lack of a better term, ending his career for all. And then, of course, he shows up in WCW. But
We'll get
that
there.
was
Let's talk about that. You talked about worried about ending his career. The guy's only 38. I mean, when he's released from WWE, is the same age as Kofi Kingston and Finn Balor today. 38 is not old.
no, but the damage, the wear and tear, the mileage on that motor, and you know, I don't know. He had torn biceps and torn triceps. Now he has this quad issue he's got to deal with. How's that going to hold up the surgery? It just yeah, it's not old, but he had more mileage on him, and because of all that Japanese stuff, it takes a toll on you. You know, talk to Stan Hansen or any of these guys.
Meltzer would write, the biggest shock on the list was Williams, who was never really given a chance. Williams, 38, was the top foreign star for All Japan when he was lured away last year with the idea of being an opponent on top for his namesake, Steve Austin. Since Williams was going to be marketed without a gimmick other than his toughness, the Brawl for All concept was put into place as a shoot, largely as a way to get him over as a legitimate tough guy and threat for Austin. In hindsight, the idea was a huge miscalculation since Williams was a very good amateur wrestler, being the only pro wrestler in history to be a 4-time NCAA tournament place winner, but he was never a boxer, and Brawl for All entailed a lot of boxing. How it turned out was something entirely different, as he destroyed his hamstring in the second round against Gunn, and trying to fight with one leg was knocked out in the third. He was out of action for months due to the injury, and still at this point is nowhere close to 100%. He was given that lame gimmick of being a masked Japanese wrestler, which lasted all of 1 week. It was so bad. And then became the protege of Jim Ross when the idea was for Ross to do something akin to a heel manager. But with Ross having maneuvered his way back into the broadcast booth, it left Williams with no spot. Word has it that Vince McMahon was fairly insistent on Williams having no future with the company since the WWF is so heavily based on looks and acting ability. And while Williams is probably still one of the strongest men in the company, he doesn't have a pretty physique and is a notoriously poor talker. Plus his ring style is quite a bit tougher from the Japan background than the company is used to, which isn't flashy by American standards. So in Meltzer's observation, this is a Vince McMahon call. He's insistent there's no future with the company. Do you remember having detailed discussions with Vince? I mean, you sort of insinuated a minute ago that you started to question your role even in talent relations with a cut like this.
Yeah, we had a lot of talks about it, and Vince just had no more patience. You know, the signing of Dr. Death was the JR and Bruce Pritchard deal. And of course, Bruce and I got some grief over it because we made the wrong decision, as if we were going to know that he was going to rip his hamstring to pieces.
Right.
And so I felt like we cut him short. They had more, even though he was not the Dr. Death of old, he was still good enough to have a passable program with Stone Cold. Again, but Steve needed a mouthpiece, and we didn't provide that, and that would have been a solution to this perceived issue. But I had long talks with Vince about it, to the point that, you know, he'd get a little angry at me for, you know, being abrasive, I guess, or insistent or uncompromising, which always caused some consternation between Vince and I. But I thought we were doing the wrong thing. And my judgment, to be perfectly honest, and I try to be honest with everything, was a lot egocentric. I wanted Steve to have that one last run so he could cap off his, with all these injuries mounting and the wear and tear on his body. God dang, would it be nice to give him one last run so he could go out on a high note. And he never got that opportunity, which I thought was a mistake.
Well, there's no debate about that. You wrote about this in your book that you were really nervous, not nervous, filled with anxiety and dread. You knew it had to be done, and you got some words of encouragement from Jan before you made the phone call to let your old pal know that you had to let him go.
Yeah. Her issues were, her points she made were so valid. Be sensitive, honey, take care, you know, talk to him like you would if he was family, because he is to you. And he was. You know, being an only child affects us all in a lot of different ways, man. And so when you get these relationships with another guy like a little brother type thing that you can kind of live vicariously through. And you've been with him every step of the journey. I used to get calls from Steve when he'd be back in the States, talking excitedly about his last tour of Japan and how they're using him. And, I beat Masawa, and, then the tag success with Gordie was pretty damn amazing. So he'd call and give me the updates and how you doing, and we'd talk OU football or whatever it was. So we always had a close relationship, and maybe too close. I learned a lesson there that when I let people go with the most earnest and honest way I knew how, and that was to listen, give them the bad news first, and then move the conversation on from there. But then none of them were ever easy. But when you have to let somebody go that you perceive, because I could see where he was. I could see now how, he was sore, and he had issues with his shoulders and his knees and all this stuff. This football. God dang, Conrad. Here's a guy that goes from D1 school, Division I school is pretty damn impressive, and you go from football where you're a star and you're playing in bowl games. Then when you get back from the bowl trip, you go right to the wrestling room. That was his life for 4 years.
Right.
And a lot of guys could not handle that issue. And he worked through injuries, soreness, dropping weight to 285, all these things. Was just, it was just, you knew this body had taken a toll. But he was so damn tough, and he was so hell-bent on not selling it that you never heard him complain. But all the while you knew that something was different about him because of his experiences in Japan. And I'm not knocking Japan by any stretch of the imagination, but the style there, for as long as he was there, working with the caliber of talent that he was working with, who are all basically stiffer than hell, and so he retaliated, he reciprocated, was going to hurt you. Somewhere along the way, the cumulative effect of those contacts, those shots, the bumps, the physicality, going to take advantage or take its toll on anybody, including the seemingly impregnable Dr. Steve Williams.
Steve had said that he originally planned to be Triple H's spot before his release. And much of what was previously booked for Steve was eventually given to Triple H, most notably the segment on October 4th, 1999, when Triple H would attack you. That would have been when Steve was going to start his feud with Austin. And because the segment was planned for Steve, this was supposed to be the moment where he would become a heel, as you were going to manage him as a face up until that point. That's all what Dr. Death had said at some point. Do you remember some of that creative being discussed?
Not to that detail, no. But it's not beyond the realm of comprehension, because the original idea that Bruce and I sold Vince on, was that Austin was our big commodity. Austin was getting just on the cusp of being the biggest star ever in wrestling, and he needed quality wins against opponents that the fans were not tired of seeing, or they were used to seeing. So Vince knew the game plan, and he signed off on it. But unfortunately, the Brawl for All injury just curtailed everything. And then you bring a guy back, and now he's almost a year older, and Dr. Death got every bad break that you could imagine, from injuries to falling out of grace to the creative. And sometimes, and I had this pushback before, where I would override creative with talents. Great example is, wanting to bring Brock Lesnar in too early. And I said, hell, he can't protect his opponents, Vince. So what are we going to do when we go to court? He named somebody because he don't know how strong he is. So the advancement of Lesnar was slowed a little bit so his skill set could catch up to his potential. That's all that was. Being responsible, and not put him in the ring with somebody that he might hurt inadvertently, obviously, not on purpose, obviously, but that's where you were there. So, but Doc was a JR and Bruce hire. And sometimes that didn't fall well with something creative, because he wasn't their guy. He was our guy.
Let's talk about November of 99. Our guy shows up in WCW. He's managed by Ed Ferrara, who is portraying the Oklahoma character. He's obviously doing a parody of you, and it's not very polite, but this is, not just Ed Ferrara doing it. He's got one of your best friends in tow with him. Did you know it before you saw it? I mean, did Steve give you a heads up, and how did you feel when you saw it?
No, the sad part about letting somebody go is it affects your relationship. And there was a time there where we were not communicating because I was perceived as the bad guy, and it affected our friendship, and affected a long, long relationship with a guy I looked at as a little brother, and that was sad, unnecessary. You can't tell me, Conrad, that the creative in WCW at that time, with Russo and Ferrara, who did a hell of a job in WWE without question. They just couldn't handle when SmackDown came around. They're going to write another show, do more work for the same money, and I understand their apprehension there. They got a nice deal at WCW, so off they went. But you can't convince me that angle with Ed Ferrara imitating me with the Bell's palsy, and then Dr. Death being there in the same role he had in one of his last appearances in WWE, as JR's bodyguard, wasn't personal. And I don't know how smart booking that really is. I know that Turner finally curtailed the Bell's palsy facet of the impersonation, but I always looked back at that as personal. I think that affected Doc and my relationship, because I'm sure that somebody probably said or could have said, well, JR could have saved you, Doc, if he'd wanted to. No, that's probably, I'm sure that was said, because they want to ingratiate themselves with him. So one way of doing it is to make me the bad guy again, and convince him that if JR had wanted you to stay, he's got a lot of influence with Vince. He's Vince's right-hand guy. He could have made that happen. Well, I couldn't make it happen. I tried to make it happen, but I thought that whole thing was very personal, and I still, I'm glad I made peace with Russo, and I made peace with Ed Ferrara over the years, because I realized, thanks to Jan again, you just can't bring those grudges with you, honey. You can't. You got to get rid of this hate and all this animosity. It's not good for you. It's not good for your health. And she was right. And I remember sitting here at home, here in this very house I'm sitting in now, here in Norman, and my phone rang, my home line rang, and she answered, and she said, it's Vince Russo. So I take the call, and we kind of cleared the air, and it was good to clear the air. But at that time, when he was Oklahoma, the Oklahoma thing was going on, I thought it was very hurtful. I thought it was very unproductive, and I could see no money in it. So all those issues gives me plenty of reasons not to go that route in creative.
Steve only stays in WCW a little over a month. Did he ever talk to you about his run here, why he left, or this infamous Oklahoma piece of business?
Well, he saw that he wasn't going to go anywhere. It was a gimmick. It was more directed to me than it was building him. And so he's got so much time left. There's only so many bumps in that bump card. So he decided to bolt. And I don't think he was ever totally comfortable with it. But, people ask this question all the time. Were you mad at Dr. Death for his role in WCW with Ferrara and Russo? No, he was booked. And this is his role. It's like filming a movie. Here's the movie. Here's your script. Here's your role. Here's what you're going to do. So if you accept the terms of the creative and accept our money, then this is what we're going to ask you to do. Doc needed money. He needed a payday. He's like a lot of guys. You hope that everybody saves money, and you understand that this thing's is going to go away somewhere along the way. The checks are going to stop coming. So that was kind of the deal. So I was never angry at Doc. Never had one bit of hostility or animosity toward him. I loved him, and I understood what he was doing. Did I like it? No. But all he was doing was running the plays that the coach called, and he was following instructions just like he was taught at OU. I don't want to run that play. I want to run another play. You just go to the line of scrimmage and block. You do your job. And of course, Cowboy was a good teacher as well in that regard. You do what the booker wants you to do to the best of your ability. If you can't handle it, then work a way to work yourself out of it. Give your notice, leave. So that was kind of the deal. But do your job while you're there. So I always looked at Doc in that regard because I knew it was a personal shot at me, and it wasn't about Doc. And I think somewhere along the way, Doc realized that as well.
Let's talk a little bit about what he's doing after this. January 7th, 2000, he pops up in All Japan to defeat Bart Gunn, who's now wrestling as Mike Barton. This is interesting booking. We never really got to see it in the States, but Japan made it happen. Did you ever have any conversations with Steve about whether or not he had any animosity towards Mike?
Not a bit. He had no animosity. You recruit real athletes, not bodybuilders. You recruit guys that are legit and don't just look good on an 8x10. So he knew the price of that. Hey, look, he's the same guy that had 108 stitches in his eye, right? He didn't ever hold any animosity toward Brad Armstrong, and he didn't hold any animosity toward Bart Gunn, as best of my knowledge. All Bart Gunn was doing was his job.
Yeah,
he was trying to win the goddamn fight, and along the way, Doc got hurt. So no, I don't think he ever had any animosity toward Mike Barton or Bart Gunn whatsoever. But it was made into a storyline angle because this is the guy that crippled Doc to death, and he's out for revenge. A good old solid wrestling storyline was what it was. But Doc never had any issues with Bart whatsoever, and that I ever heard. He never spoke to me about it. He may have to the boys or having a beer or something. I don't have a clue. But to me, in the conversations that we had, he never held any animosity toward Bart for injuring Doc.
Let's talk a little bit about February 2nd, 2000. It's the last hurrah of sorts. Steve teams up with Big Van Vader to beat Kobashi and Akiyama for the tag titles in All Japan. What a team that must have been. Dr. Death and Vader, huh?
Oh God, yeah. Lord, good Lord, what an attraction. Hey, watching their entrance is scary.
Yeah.
Can you imagine standing in the ring waiting on them? Both guys could be heavy-handed, especially Leon. But Doc was just going to maul you. He's going to make you do things that you never thought you were going to want to do, but you had no choice. He had that great amateur background, so he could destroy your vertical base whenever he wanted to. He could take you down whenever he wanted to. And of course, Leon was just a brute, 400-pound athletic son of a bitch. The most athletic super heavyweight I ever saw was Big Van Vader, without a doubt. For a 400-pound guy to do a moonsault and not kill somebody, pretty damn talented. So yeah, that was an interesting combination. But again, what good vision of putting two guys together but when put together, their individual discrepancies of wear and tear, age, et cetera, was kind of be covered or hidden, so to speak, because you're just so in awe of these two giant men moving around like smaller guys athletically, and that their work was absolutely you couldn't see through it. It didn't look like somebody playing the role of a wrestler. These guys were just being themselves, being badass, massive athletes that asked for no quarter and certainly gave none. So it was a good booking by Mr. Baba again.
Let's talk about May of 2003. On May 23rd, he beats Lance Storm on a house show, and the next night, Lance beats him. How does this come about, and why is it only 2 matches? It feels like maybe behind the scenes, you or somebody was campaigning for him to have another shot, and they give maybe a couple of tryout matches, and Vince still says no. Is that pretty much the gist of it?
Yeah, pretty much. Lance Storm is an amazingly talented guy, one of the best coaches and teachers in the game, and sad that he's closed down his school, which I thought was one of the best schools in the country or anywhere, considering he did it in Calgary, so that country, period. But you do things like that where you bring a guy in. I remember bringing Chris Benoit in for a tryout. I think we had him work with Owen, and Owen went over. And some of that is to see how the guy reacts when he's told he's going to lose. Some of it's to see how he's going to execute and to see if his ego's in check. And I think that was the issue there with Lance Storm and Doc. One night Doc's going to win. Now let's see how he does on the other side of the coin. How does he put somebody over? That type of logic So that was the reason for the two, a win and a loss. How's his demeanor? How's his effort? Did he have the same effort winning or losing that he did winning? Those type things you measure. So I think that was part of the scenario there, Conrad, is that, I kept lobbying for Doc to get a shot because we needed quality talents. And again, he might not have been the main event guy, but he would help us on the card. Everybody can't, as I've said this before, everybody can't bat and line up fourth or fifth. Everybody's not a cleanup hitter. He was, but he still can contribute to the team effort. At least I thought so. But it didn't, we didn't go back and revisit Doc, and we tried. We certainly tried.
September of 2003, finds out he's got cancer. He's got a stage 4 tumor growing in his throat. And he says all he knows to do is to start praying. When you first hear that your old friend has cancer, what's that got to be like from your perspective?
Heartbreaking. No different than, Conrad, if somebody told you that a family member had cancer, how would you react type thing? Right. We know how you would react. You'd be upset. You'd cry. You'd try to, what could I have done to make his life better? All these things, because I genuinely cared for the guy. And that was the problem I had in that role in the head of talent relations, is sometimes I built relationships that probably were borderlining too personal, because that's how I managed. I took an interest in the guys that would allow me to do so. And I was always in his life, and he was always in mine in the formative years. We talk about, he signed in 1981, right? I think it was 81 we said, 80 or 81 for OU. Well, in 1980, let's say for easy math, I was 28 years old. 28 years old. So I was young, and I was in his demo, and he was my guy. And we grew up together in the wrestling business at the hands and under the tutelage of Cowboy Bill Watts, Ernie Ladd, and several other guys that were influential in both our careers in that era. It broke my heart, and I just kept saying, well, he'll kick cancer's ass. There's no way that this is going to kill this guy. He's just not going to happen. But then I saw him not too long after that. He was in the MD Anderson Cancer Hospital in Houston. And OU played Texas A&M in College Station, which is an easy drive from Houston. So Doc was there with some people, I think maybe some family members, some friends, or people from the hospital to come to the game. We decided we're going to meet at a certain place to hug and talk and all that. And I must have walked by him like twice. I didn't recognize him because he was down to about 190, under 200, somewhere in that neighborhood. He's 100 pounds down. It changes your looks immensely. And I didn't recognize him. So when I saw him with his big hug, and he had to hold his, he had an open wound there in his throat where they were doing the chemo and all that shit. He had a patch over his throat so he could, keep the debris or any other bad things out of that. But it affected his voice was always gravelly, but he had to hold his throat to talk, over the bandaged up throat to talk. It was heartbreaking. But here's what I remember about that. After the big hug, he hadn't lost all his strength. I can remember that. It was a good hug. We cried. And I'm sure people are saying, well, those two OU guys in those OU clothes, what are they crying about? We ain't beat their ass yet. But we cried and we hugged. And all I can remember of that meeting, Conrad, was how much he laughed. We tell a story, I'd tell a story, and he loved my stories. He'd laugh, had fun, talking about our trials and tribulations with the big cowboy and all those things. But he laughed. In the face of death, he laughed.
What year do you think that would have been?
Oh, God, it was right along this 2000, in the 2003 or 4. Not long after he got diagnosed. Well, probably 4, because he had already started taking the chemo.
Yeah.
And that was wrecking his ass. It was bad.
He undergoes surgery for throat cancer in 2004. They have to cut his vocal cords. They take his thyroid out. They cut a nerve to his deltoid. for 3 months after surgery. He doesn't have a voice. He can't talk. He doesn't know what to do except, reach for God more and more every day and pray a little more every day. And one morning he's awoken because he's bleeding from his neck, and he finds out that, hey, I'm in trouble. So he jumps in his truck, drives 4 hours, 100 miles an hour, all the way to MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. And when he gets there, the doctors are curious. Hey, how in the world did you do this? And he points up to, the ceiling and then writes down the word God because he still can't talk. And a pastor walks by and they say the Lord's Prayer together, and they put Steve under for 10 hours to work on him. And believe it or not, he comes out the other side. He even wrestles a match in August of '05 at the Wrestle Reunion 2 event. And fast forward to '06, and I'm sure his old pal JR helped him get an appearance at a SmackDown branded house show, in Alexandria, Louisiana. And, he briefly gets an opportunity to work with some up and coming wrestlers in Ohio Valley, including a young upstart named Jake Hager. So, these Oklahoma boys got to stick together, right?
You're damn right. It's just like your Roll Tide. We stuck together. I'm getting tears in my eyes. It's just, I tried to help him so many times because I loved him. Not unlike if somebody off the roster that I helped to facilitate a job, if they came to me today, I would help them. That was just my style. And I got that from Barry Switzer. You recruit a player for life. I've been at Switzer's house having drinks, having something cooking out or whatever, and his phone would be ringing incessantly from former players that either want to check on the coach or they needed something. They needed a bed. They needed rent money, things of that nature. And Coach Switzer looked at me just as serious as a heart attack. Kid, when you recruit these guys, Jim, you recruit them for life. That's how I work. You recruit them for life. And I had a friend for life, and I kept trying to help him, but the cancer kicked both our ass.
It's a sad story, but there are a couple of highlights on the way out. Once he gets Jake Hager up and going in OVW, he actually gets the team with Jake twice. I'm sure that was a thrill for both of them, both with their Oklahoma born and bred. And let's fast forward. There's an August 30th Raw house show. He's going to come out and address the crowd and announce that he's been cancer free for 4 years. His final match would happen August 15th, 2009 in Colorado Springs. He would win an independent championship there, but immediately vacate it right after. And unfortunately, the throat cancer comes back, and his last public appearance is at a WrestleFest convention, December 12th, 2009 in New Jersey. And sadly, Steve passed away on December 29th, 2009 at St. Anthony Central Hospital in Denver from throat cancer. He was just 49 years old when we lost him. And, everything I've heard from people who knew him, Jim, that even though he knew he was going down, he was, in positive spirits and had a good attitude about the whole thing. His relationship with God certainly gave him quite a bit of peace of mind.
Absolutely. That was a difference maker. His faith at the end and during this ordeal pulled him through. The love of his family and his friends helped pull him through. But his faith in God and reading the Bible and putting it, knowing that he was going to a better place much sooner than later. He makes the appearance in New Jersey, and that was, I think, 2 weeks before he died?
Yeah, like 17 days.
Can you imagine the discomfort he was in?
No.
To go chase that goddamn payday? And that was it. That was it. And, I knew the end was coming. I wasn't totally unprepared for the phone call. And I know Coach Switzer and I we both cried because we took Coach Switzer got some alum to fly us to Colorado from Norman, and we flew to Colorado. Some of the Steve's coaches were on the flight. Coach Switzer most prominent, myself, and so we got to we went to the services, and there's why he had a video done, and Conrad, you wouldn't even recognize him. The cancer had ravaged him. He couldn't eat. His throat, it's horrible. It's horrible. And it just proved to me that cancer is absolutely the devil. but he was fearless. At the end, he was fearless. He wasn't intimidated to die because he had made his peace and he was ready to go. And that funeral was a very emotional situation. His brother, Jeff, who was part of that package deal, we'll sign Jeff because he's a pretty good tight end. But the one we want's his little brother.
Right.
So Jeff was there. They had stark resemblance to each other, as you would expect brothers to have more often than not. But it was a packed church, small but packed, and it was one of the most memorable days of my life. Not just in wrestling. This is way beyond wrestling. This is about friendship and the love of another human being. And I lost somebody that was irreplaceable. And I just wish I could have made it better for him. I wish he could have got that one run with Austin. And things had not happened. The Brawl for All had not happened. But that's part of our journey, man. I've talked about losing Jan and things of that nature. It's a part of my journey. Do I relish it? Hell no. Of course not. But it's a part of our journey. And we all know eventually what the destination is going to be. We're leaving Earth. We're dying. And Doc left us at 49 much too early. And but it was a heartbreaker. And the one thing for sure, I was living here in Oklahoma at the time, and I would have gone to his funeral if I had to drive. Been happy to. But Coach Switzer got hold of me and said, I'm going to Doc's funeral, and I know they want you there, and you want you to fly over there with us. So that's what we did. And we told Dr. Death stories all the way over and all the way back. And it was actually kind of fun, the trip. We knew why we were going. We knew what our responsibilities were when we got there. But telling stories about him and listening for me to listen to those stories from his coaches, the guys that he was around the most, was really cool because Steve had earned such great respect from his coaching staff. And he was their son. He was their son because Steve's dad passed away in the mid-'80s. So all those coaches kind of raised Steve. And of course, you got his brother there on campus. Both of them were on scholarship. He was part of the family. And he certainly will always be a part of my family. I think about Steve virtually every day. Some shape, form, or fashion, somebody reminds me of Steve Dr. Death Williams. And I'll always be thankful to God that I had him in my life as long as I did.
What are your, do you have some favorite memories of spending time with Doc you want to share with us before we wrap things up?
Well, just that he was a big old teddy bear. He had this gruff voice and gravelly voice and this menacing physique. I'll debate Mr. McMahon on the fact that Doc didn't have a good body. He had a body of an athlete. He did not have the body of a bodybuilder. He didn't look like Lex Luger. But I'll take Dr. Death and that motor and his toughness over just about anybody I've ever worked with. But we always had fun together. And, Doc didn't always make the best decisions. And we can all say that about ourselves. I certainly have not either in my lifetime. I'm blessed to still be getting up this morning. But he was just a big teddy bear. He was emotional. He'd cry. He had a hell of a temper when provoked, but he didn't want to go there first. He wasn't a bully. He was not a bully. He just was a magnificent, gifted athlete that was special. But he was most special as my friend. And I'll always miss my friend. And I just hope someday I get to see him again at the end of the day.
What do you think his legacy will be in professional wrestling? And can you recommend a couple of Dr. Death matches for some of our younger listeners who may not be familiar with his work to go check out?
Well, his legacy is going to be that he was legitimately one of the toughest guys to ever put on tights. He was legitimately one of the all-time toughest guys in the history of pro wrestling. Was he the guy that could beat anybody up in a fight and all that stuff in a street fight without those damn boxing gloves on? Why do you put boxing gloves on a wrestler? Why do you put a wrestler in a elaborate tough man contest? No sense. Makes no sense. But I think his legacy is going to be Doc was a bad dude physically. He was a wonderful, soft-hearted guy internally. That's that's how I think his legacy is going to be. But I think the toughness and his physicality, his athletic ability for his size, is what he's going to be known for. I think if you go back and look at any of the Doc and Gordie matches against the Steiners, money, go back and look at his match where he won the UWF title against the Big Boss Man, a.k.a.
Big Bubba Rodgers.
Big Bubba, no trouble. Classic. The match he had with Gordie in Houston in the tournament, money. So all those were matches that I would suggest people go back and look at. Because you look at Hall of Fame level guys, human beings, and extraordinary talents that we don't see dotted in the wrestling landscape today. Big size, and I don't sound like a size freak here. It's just the fact that the bigger guys that are athletic draw money. Cowboy told me that years ago. Athletic big men sell tickets. That doesn't mean that athletic smaller guys don't sell tickets. It just means that you got a less of a margin for error. If you got a big, rugged ass athlete that looks real, legitimate, is more easily marketed than a smaller guy. Smaller guys are better suited for tag teams. Look at the Midnights were not giants. Certainly Ricky and Robert, the Rock and Roll Express, were not giants. So they were great in tag teams. Doc was very effective in tags, as we talked about, but he was also effective as a singles guy. So I think that those matches, I'd check those out. Steiner's tag, the Gordie one-on-one in Houston, the UWF match with Ray Traylor was just a piece of art. So go back and look at those folks, and you'll see what we're talking about here, and look at the amazing athleticism and balance and all that you love, you covet in any wrestler, no matter their size. So if I had a Hall of Fame, he'd be in it. I can tell you that right now. He would certainly be in my Hall of Fame just because I'm biased, I'm partial, and I love the guy.
Well, and we love that you were able to share all this with us. We know he was one of your great friends, and today would have been a special day, his 60th birthday. So let's fill up Twitter today, guys, with some of your favorite Dr. Death matches and celebrate the legacy of one of the best wrestlers that ever put on a pair of tights. Next week, we've got something else fun coming your way. Looking forward to it each and every week here only on Westwood One. Of course, you can get these shows early and ad free if you'll join us over at adfreeshows.com. But next week, we're going to turn the volume up in the WWF universe. We're going to be watching Judgment Day 2000. It's not a watch along, but both Jim and I will check it out and then give you our thoughts and feedback about the news and notes surrounding the company. And then we'll finish out the month of May with a May 25th, 2005 Raw is War watch along. It's a special show, no spoilers, but watch it with us. But next week, Judgment Day 2000, he is at JR's BBQ. I am at Hey, it's Conrad, and we are out of time. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and pick up the brand new book, Under the Black Hat, at jrsbbq.com. We'll see you next week right here on Westwood One. It's Grillin' JR with the voice of wrestling. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at savewithconrad.com.